Chapter 2064. Meg firmly believed that Irina was able to calmly let this matter go because of her trust in him. That's right. Between husband and wife, trust is something stronger than gold and stone. If he had the guts, he would have already touched my bed. Why would the little bitch outside have a chance?
Amen.
Irina put down the pen and closed the diary. After sitting by the bed for a while, Irina got up and opened the door to the next room. Meg, who was sitting at the desk and drawing, heard the sound and turned around in surprise. Irina, who was wearing a gauze nightgown, had a perfect figure that was faintly discernible. Her fair face seemed to have a seductive glow under the warm light. But looking at her half-smile, Meg felt a little scared. Could it be that she went back on her words? He glanced at her left hand, and after confirming that there was no folding chair there, he was slightly relieved. "What's wrong? Is something wrong?" Meg got up and asked with a smile. "What's wrong? We're an old married couple. Can I come to you at night if there's nothing wrong?" Irina asked with a smile. When she turned around, the gauze nightgown slid down a little, revealing a bit of her shoulder. Looking at that exquisite collarbone and creamy skin, Mag's Adam's apple bobbed unconsciously. He had seen many so-called goddesses, and he had thought that he could handle women as if they were nothing. But in front of Irina, his heart couldn't help but beat faster, and his mind was in a mess. Just like the feeling of first love? Seeming to have noticed Meg's abnormality, Irina slightly raised the corner of her mouth. She walked into the room, closed the door, and locked it. Meg glanced at the locked door, and then looked at Irina, who was walking towards him. He felt that something was going to happen tonight. Irina walked in front of him and was only half a meter away from him. She must have just taken a shower as her face was still a little rosy. He could smell the faint fragrance of the water of life and a little jasmine on her body. It was a fragrance that made people feel comfortable and addicted. Irina raised her head slightly to look at him. Her eyes were sparkling, and her face was flushed red. Her breathing seemed to have become a little faster. The atmosphere seemed to have become a little more ambiguous. Meg took half a step forward. Their bodies were almost touching as he teased her. "What's wrong? Is the queen shy as well?" "No, the queen will never be arranged." Irina reached out and pushed Meg onto the bed. Then, she climbed on top of him. Today's moon was big, round and soft. This was the truest thought in his heart when he climbed to the peak. There was a poem to prove it. The sounds of the lovers whispered, the fragrance of the wind rushed, and the red lips pressed against each other. Fragrant skin like snow, the gauze dress slowly unraveled, revealing the spring scenery. The fragrant jade body said that it was warm, how many wind and moon. Tonight, the fish and water were harmonious, trembling, and the spring tide was hard to stop. 1,000 murmurs, 100 panting sounds, several times of pleasure. Note 1: it was a sleepless night. The next morning, Meg was woken up by a knock on the door. Meg sat up in bed with his hands on his waist. He glanced at the beauty, who was still sleeping next to him with a satisfied look on her face. He couldn't help but smile a little proudly. "Father, we're starving to death." Amy's voice came from outside the door. Meg quickly got out of bed and put on his clothes. He pulled the blanket over Irina and covered her long, fair legs before opening the door and going out. He looked at Amy and Anna, who were guarding the door, and said with a smile, "Why? Are you both hungry?" "Yes." The two little ones nodded at the same time. "Mother isn't in her room. Did she sleep at your place last night?" Amy asked as she peeked into Mag's room. Mag nodded.
"Ah."
She said there were rats in the room last night, so she was scared and ran to my room to sleep. Meg quickly closed the door and explained with a smile. "So you two didn't sleep well last night after fighting rats?" Amy said thoughtfully. "So you woke up late?" "Yes, that's what happened." Meg held back his laughter and accepted the little one's excuse. He said, "Let her sleep for a while. I'll go make breakfast for you too." "Okay." Amy nodded and obediently followed Meg downstairs. Rats? In the room, Irina opened her eyes and stretched lazily. Her eyes were still a little dazed. She whispered, Don't you know how to be gentler? Meg made a sumptuous breakfast and specially filled a big bowl of soy milk for himself. Amy went upstairs to call her mother down for breakfast. After a while, Irina came downstairs in a casual dress. Her footsteps were a little unnatural. Meg quickly got up and pulled out a chair for her. He naturally took her hand and helped her sit down. Irina's fingertips tickled his palm. She glared at him with 30% resentment and 70% affection. Her delicate appearance made her look like a newlywed wife. Meg carried a bowl of nutritious chicken soup and placed it in front of Irina. He said with a smile, "I made this especially for you. I added some life water. It's very nutritious." "You're drinking that?" Irina glanced at Meg's bowl of soy milk. "I have to take good care of myself, too." Meg nodded in agreement. Irina seemed to have thought of something. Her face immediately flushed red, and she glared at Meg. Meg smiled and returned to his seat. He took a bite of a youtiao and drank 2 mouthfuls of soy milk. He was also hungry and needed to replenish his energy. After breakfast, Meg cleaned up the dishes. He had overworked himself last night and canceled all his activities for the day. He just wanted to rest at home for the day. Anne's drawing is really good, and she's so fast. I've only been out for 2 or 3 days, and she's already drawn 3 sketchbooks. Irina opened Anne's sketchbook and was a little surprised. Yeah, she has a pair of hands that all cartoonists are envious of. Meg nodded in agreement. Perhaps she was a cartoonist with a talent for tentacles.
Oh, yes.
What's that big machine of yours for? Irina asked Meg. It's for Anne's sketchbooks. That's a machine that can print color. It can print sketchbooks with colors, Meg explained. But no one in the factory knows how to use it. Irina shook her head. It's all right. I'll go back and operate it myself in a few days. Meg was also worried about letting others operate it. That was a nuclear-powered printing machine. If there was a mistake and it self-destructed, Chaos City would really be leveled. Meg brewed a pot of tea, poured a cup, and put it beside him. He was reading a book called The Chronicles of Abnormal Magical Beasts, leisurely. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Who is it? Meg turned around. That beautiful lady boss who made you walk out with your hand on her waist. She's here to look for you again, Irina said with a half-smile. I'll go open the door. Amy jumped down from the chair and skipped towards the door. Note 1. This poem is excerpted from the 3000 Tang poems. It has nothing to do with Whispers of the Underworld. Chapter 2065. AI faced it outside the door with a small basket in her hand. She wrapped her small cotton vest tightly around her. The weather was still so cold, making this damned winter seem especially long. Of course, if she wasn't wearing a dress inside, it wouldn't be as cold as it was now. Today, she came to thank Mr. Hades and tell him that she had successfully registered for the wine tasting conference. She had already given up on seducing Hades for the sake of good wine. This made her seem like a beautiful bad woman who would do anything for benefits. After all, she now had a wine cellar filled with the best Titan wine in the world. It was enough for the Titan Tavern to operate steadily for 20 years. Therefore, she now planned to establish a deep friendship with the excellent Mr. Hades. Of course, if there was a story outside of their friendship, she wouldn't mind. At this moment, she already felt that she had the qualifications to be on equal footing with Mr. Hades, including the qualifications to talk to his wife. She took out a small mirror from her small bag and confirmed that her makeup was still in its best state. She also maintained a perfect smile on her face.
Creak.
The door opened, and a little girl stood at the door, curiously looking at AI Faye. Hello, beautiful baby. May I ask if Mr. Hades is home? AI Faye smiled as she looked at Amy. She had to admit that this little girl's appearance was too exquisite. She had perfectly inherited all her mother's good points, making people have the urge to steal her away.
Yes.
Not only is my father at home, but my mother is also at home. Amy nodded and looked back. She took a step forward and whispered, Yesterday, Mother found out that Father went to your tavern to play. She punished him by making him stand. So it's like that. AI Faye's expression was a bit awkward, and she felt a bit guilty. She didn't think that because of her, Mr. Hades would suffer such grievances at home. I'm here to look for Mr. Mag regarding the wine tasting conference. We were also talking about work yesterday, AI Faye explained with a smile. She didn't try to control her voice as she wanted the people inside to hear. Miss AI Faye, please come in. Meg's voice sounded from inside. Please come in. Amy also stepped aside to make way for the door, but she still whispered, don't mess with my mother. She's really super powerful. AI Faye laughed it off. She wasn't someone to be trifled with. She walked into the tavern confidently, with her head held high. This was also her first time entering the Saipan Tavern. The decorations and the size of the tavern were smaller and simpler than she had expected. However, as soon as she entered, her gaze was attracted by the woman sitting at the table in the middle. It was difficult to describe her beauty with words. At the very least, when she looked at her face and figure, she felt a sense of inferiority for the first time. She just sat there calmly with a sketchbook in her hand, but she still had the aura of a family head. When she raised her head and looked at her, AI Faye subconsciously stopped in her tracks. She felt an unprecedented pressure. It was the suppression of another woman's aura. She even had a smile on her face. But she sensed a cold, murderous aura from that smile. This was the feedback that a woman's powerful sixth sense gave her. This was a terrifying woman, a woman that she was powerless against. She unconsciously lowered her head, and her chest slowly withdrew. Only her eyes were still stubbornly looking at Irina. Irina was also sizing up AI Faye. This young woman had a charm that was beyond her age. Didn't some men like this kind of feeling? She looked at Meg and wondered if he was one of those men. But when she thought of his performance last night, she temporarily put this thought aside. Right, he didn't have the guts. However, this woman had this kind of thought. Come to think of it, it had been many years since such a woman appeared. Interesting. A hint of interest appeared in Irina's eyes. She wanted to see what abilities and tricks this woman had to snatch her man away. She would treat this as a form of training. Meg, who was sitting between the two of them, felt the terrifying aura of the Azura arena. At this time, he didn't know whether he should be happy or not. Miss AI Faye, right? What business do you have with my man? Irina looked at AI Faye with interest as she asked. This must be Mr. Hades' wife. AI Faye smiled and put the small basket in her hand on the table. I'm here to inform Mr. Hades that your tavern has successfully registered for the wine tasting conference. I also want to thank him for helping me so much yesterday. This is a special snack, and also a small token of my appreciation. I still have many things to ask Mr. Hades about. Miss AI Faye is too polite. It's just a small matter, and you've already registered for it. Meg braced himself and stood up. He looked at AI Faye and politely said, sit for a while. It's so cold, have a cup of hot tea. Right now, he just wanted AI Faye to hurry home. In this kind of atmosphere, men suffered the most. Yes, it's so cold today, but Mr. Hades' tavern is so warm. Does he have a heater? AI Faye sat down on the chair beside Mag with a smile. She warmed her hands, which had turned red from the cold, by the fire, and turned to Mag with a vibrant smile as she said, it's so warm. Meg. He glanced at Irina. He really just wanted to be polite. Irina didn't say anything. She only smiled and looked at him, as if waiting for him to solve it himself. Since she had already sat down, Meg naturally couldn't drive her out. He could only pour her a cup of tea. Thank you, AI Faye said sweetly. She held the cup with both hands and warmed her hands. Meg nodded slightly and sat down again. I already gave the blueprint to the 3 old blacksmiths this morning. They should be able to produce the finished product in 3 days. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble Mr. Hades to help me assemble it. AI Faye looked at Meg and said, yes, when the parts arrive, I'll help you assemble it. I'll also have to teach you how to use it on the spot. Meg nodded. After all, AI Faye wasn't Hannah. She didn't know anything about machinery. I don't know how to thank you. AI Faye looked at Meg gratefully. How about you give yourself to me? Irina interrupted with a smile. AI Faye's expression froze. Then she was a little happy. Meg's eyelids twitched a few times. What was going on?
How can I do that?
After all, Mr. Hades is a man with a family. He also has a beautiful wife and a cute daughter like you. AI Faye flicked her hair and shook her head slightly. Pretty good. At least I'm not blind. Irina nodded. AI Faye's hand suddenly froze. Chapter 2066. When gods fought, the fish in the moat would be caught in the crossfire. Meg felt like he was an innocent little fish. Thankfully, their combat prowess wasn't on the same level, so the battle didn't end with Effie's quick defeat. This woman is very impressive. Effie took a sip of her tea before taking a glance at Irina. She turned to Meg and said, Mr. Hades, I want to restore the Titan Tavern to its former glory. Can you give me some suggestions? Meg thought for a moment before replying. First, you have to find your niche. The Titan Tavern that serves authentic aged Titan wine should be the best tavern in Rodu, so you have to target the wealthiest and most valuable customers. Secondly, you have to subtract from the alcohol list. Titan wine is undoubtedly the treasure of the tavern, but the daily supply is limited, so it won't be long before demand exceeds supply. However, the quality of the alcohol can't be too bad either. It's better to go without than to be substandard. At the very least, it has to be worthy of being a high-end tavern. This is also a very important step in screening customers. Lastly, there's the issue of management. As a high-end tavern, it has to have a matching service and atmosphere. You have to figure this out yourself. Effie pondered for a moment before hesitantly replying, but the alcohol that I can brew is very limited. I can't brew anything that can compare to Titan wine at the moment. Titan wine was already the best alcohol that she could brew, but it was worthless in Meg's eyes. At times like this, you have to rely on external help. I think you should be able to purchase alcohol brewed by other breweries in Rodu. Even if the price is slightly higher and the profits are slightly lower, as long as the quality is up to standard, you can use it to solve the problem. Meg smiled. Effie's eyes lit up, and she stood up with a grateful expression. Thank you, Mr. Hades. You're welcome. Meg shook his head before shooting a glance at Irina. Then I won't disturb you any further. Effie stood up and bade farewell. Meg watched as AI Faye left. Watching the door slowly close behind her, he breathed a sigh of relief.
Why?
Are you still reluctant? Irina looked at Meg with a faint smile. How could I be that kind of person?
She's not my type.
Meg shook his head firmly. A woman in her 30s is the most plump and juicy age. She is sensible and knows how to dote on others. Would you not like her? Irina asked with a smile. Meg looked at Irina and raised his eyebrows. Winky face, aren't you only 30? A blush appeared on Irina's face as she glared at Meg with annoyance. Meg was a little innocent. He was just stating facts. New side quest, a wish from Effie. Help Effie restore the Titan Tavern to the glory of her father's era. Young mistress, please take part in this process. The system will decide the reward based on your participation and influence. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Amy's mind. But even the Saipan Tavern didn't have a glorious past. Now I have to help another tavern become glorious? Amy was a little puzzled. Young mistress, please complete the quest according to the system's instructions. All explanations are up to the system. Then why don't you explain yourself? System. This, Garland and Milo looked at the tightly shut door of Amy's with a dumbfounded expression. They had finally managed to get out of Rodu and arrive here after a long and arduous journey, but who would have thought that they would be given the cold shoulder? Mr. Meg didn't say anything about the restaurant being closed in the letter, right? Garland asked with furrowed brows. But he didn't say anything about the restaurant being open as usual. Milo smiled bitterly. What do we do now? Even if we go back now, we might not be able to enter the city. Garland scratched her head. Since we're already here, it would be a pity to waste the funds. Why don't we go for a massage first? Milo suggested with a smile.
No.
How can we just burn the funds? Garland shook her head with a straight face. No, I mean let's find a place to stay first. When Mr. Meg comes back, we can get a massage while we're at it. Yes, that's right. Let's go to the restaurant we went to last time. Garland said cheerfully. Father, when will Amy's reopen? Palmer looked at the closed door of the restaurant and looked up at George. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe when Mr. Mac has fun, he'll come back, George said helplessly as he rubbed his growling stomach. It was another day when they came full of expectations and returned in disappointment. I saw Uncle Harrison yesterday. He's become thinner, Palmer said.
Tisk, TSK.
This guy is really going all out for women. George smiled. Speaking of which, I haven't seen him in a while. Sure enough, when Mr. Mac closes, it's the best time for fatties to lose weight. Then, what are we having for breakfast? Let's go. Let's go to the restaurant in front to have the low-quality eggplant with garlic sauce. I'll buy you an ice cream later, George said as he patted Palmer's head and led him to the horse-drawn carriage. Although Amy's was still closed, there were still customers who didn't want to give up and take a look at the restaurant every day. However, after Meg made a few recipes public, a few restaurants in the Aden Square immediately opened up. Although the taste was not as good as Amy's, it was still a comfort to the foodies' stomachs. We copied their dishes and used their names, so we have to do our best to make good dishes. We can't ruin their reputation. Is the eggplant with garlic sauce for human consumption? You can't even make the most basic knife skills. The eggplants are all different sizes. How can you make a good dish with this attitude? Let me tell you, I'll give you 3 more days. If you can't make this dish with the attitude, all of you can get out of here. Even my neighbor, Andy Wong, makes better food than you. Can you be more shameless? A boss scolded in the kitchen with his hands on his hips. Come, try the eggplant with garlic sauce I made today. Auntie Wong brought the eggplant with garlic sauce to the table. The dozen or so people in the house were already waiting anxiously. There were also braised squid tentacles sashimi, octopus balls, and other dishes on the table. After Auntie Wong sat down, everyone started to eat. The squid tentacles Mother made today are even better. The octopus balls are so delicious. Grandma is amazing. I love Grandma's cooking. Grandma's eggplant with garlic sauce is so delicious. Everyone was full of praises. Eat more if you like it. I'll make more for you tonight. Auntie Wong's smile was as bright as a chrysanthemum. As a woman who had been criticized for her bad cooking for half her life, she never thought that she would be able to make her husband and children praise her cooking. And all of this was because she met Mr. Meg. He was a true friend of women. Chapter 2067. Observers logs the new residents of the Southwest Sea, the Lantist, found a way to break free from the seal by eating some kind of dark yellow soil. They also obtained a way to breathe out of the bottom of the sea. However, due to the limited amount of soil, only 2,300 people have broken free from the seal. The number is increasing steadily, and all of them can break free in 3 years. This race has guarded the seal at the entrance of Arb Ela for 5,230 years, exceeding the agreed time limit by 230 years. The seal is in good condition now, and the risk of damage is low. The race's memory is still sealed, so the risk of the agreement being leaked is low. Incident assessment. Do not intervene. Traces of the Great Old One's activities have been found in the Southwest Sea. It is suspected to be related to Cthulhu, but it was successfully blocked and destroyed. Tracing failed due to unknown reasons. It is suspected to be the work of a light element magic caster. The remaining spiritual waves have been eliminated. Incident assessment. Head to Cthulhu's seal to investigate. The seal at the seal below Sky Island has been broken by an external force. The lower half of Cthulhu's body has disappeared. Seen. No traces of Cthulhu's servants found. Judging from the degree of damage, it is the strongest level in the ancient continent. It might be related to Cthulhu's spiritual control. Incident assessment. First order incident. Report received. Trace Cthulhu's whereabouts immediately and seal it again. The seal at the center area has lost its effectiveness due to wear and tear over the years. The upper half of Cthulhu's body had successfully broken the seal. However, the new residents sealed it again and left a set of cutting tools and a mysterious teleportation device at the scene to send the cut body to another place. The destination has not been determined yet. A powerful lightning mark has been found on Cthulhu's body. It has exceeded the limit of the new resident's abilities. It is suspected that a limited-level powerhouse has appeared on the Norland continent. Tracing failed again. Could it be related to the power outside the void? The new seal is stable now. Due to the endless cutting, Cthulhu is in a weakened state. There might be a possibility of it being completely killed. Incident assessment. Surveillance sprites have been left at the seal to prevent Cthulhu's lower half from trying to break the seal and merge. Continue to track the mysterious powerhouse. Report if a limited-level powerhouse appears. The new residents have discovered Cthulhu's existence. Their understanding is being assessed. Part of Cthulhu's body was found in an unrecorded city 30 miles away from the central seal. What was incredible was that it had been processed and sold as food. The new residents would buy it and cook it and eat it. Oh my God! Someone was eating Cthulhu. This ingredient is called octopus tentacles. The method of eating this ingredient came from a chef named Meg, and the shop that sold Cthulhu's body seemed to be related to him. Concern. In this city, they also discovered a machine called the steam engine. It used the steam obtained by burning coal to drive the piston and convert it into kinetic energy, thus obtaining a stable and controllable kinetic energy. It was used as a means of transportation and an important source of kinetic energy for production. Perhaps this could be a sign that the inhabitants of the ancient continent had entered the age of steam. According to the current situation, steam engines should be popularized on the Norland continent very soon and promote social change. Oh yeah, there's a magazine that's selling like hotcakes in this city recently. The reason is that the chef named Meg seems to be very popular. Incident assessment. Entering the age of steam may bring about huge changes to the Norland continent, but the specific effects are unknown. Focus on the mysterious Meg. If necessary, make contact with him. Many mysterious spatial passageways have been discovered in the ancient continent. They are connected to many mysterious captive sites. There are obvious traces of species being modified and cultivated, but there are no captive culprits at the scene. A series of tools that are beyond the current technological level of the ancient continent have been discovered in the captive sites. They are suspected to be from a foreign civilization, but it's impossible to determine if they are hostile or have the intention of invading. Incident assessment. Second sequence incident. Trace the spatial passageways and find the possible new invaders. Extract samples and analyze the level and threat of the civilization. Traces of Cthulhu's activities have been discovered in the Twilight Forest, absorbing the resentment of the dead. According to the tracing results, it's not done by Cthulhu himself, but a puppet controlled by him. The new inhabitants are still generally weak, and their ability to protect themselves is weak. They also don't have the reliable ability to search for the controlled ones. Incident assessment. The number and strength of the puppets are unknown. Cthulhu is trying to recover its strength and may cause more tragedies. Traces of Cthulhu's puppet have been discovered in the capital of the newly established human nation, the Roth Empire. Through sense, the puppet is the prince of the country, and its identity has been exposed. However, it is no longer in the city, and there are no traces of it for the time being. Suspected nuclear energy waves have been detected in this city. Incident assessment. Collect the individual information of this puppet and continue to track its traces. You may be able to find the lower half of Cthulhu's body. Verify the source of the nuclear energy waves and check if it is related to a foreign civilization. Observer. She codename 9527. Host, the system's water temperature monitoring robot at the lobster farm in the Boundless Sea Realm, the sunlight monitoring device at the soybean farm in the Twilight Forest, and many other farm machines have suddenly disappeared these few days. Meg, who was reading an ancient book, suddenly heard the system's random words in his mind. "You can't ask me to reimburse you for this, right?" Meg replied casually as he continued reading. These machines have locators installed in them to make it easier to retrieve them, but now they have disappeared. Maybe they were destroyed by some magic beast. The farms are equipped with real-time monitoring systems. There is no possibility of a strong attacking magic beast suddenly breaking in, and there are no traces left behind by the on-site monitoring. They disappeared into thin air, and their locator signals were blocked. This is an extremely abnormal situation, so this system is informing you, the system said seriously. Meg put down the ancient book in his hand and asked, "What does this mean?" "It could be done by a powerhouse whose strength is beyond the control of the system, or it could be a capture from a more advanced civilization," the system answered. "What kind of powerhouse?" Meg frowned. "An existence that is beyond the current level limit of the Norland continent, similar to the Great Old Ones." "What about civilization? Is there a civilization that is more advanced than the system?" Meg asked again. "This system is the god of cookery cultivation system. Its technological settings are relatively low, and the items in the exchange are mostly obsolete items from other systems. Therefore, its civilization level is only equivalent to the level of Earth in 2050, but it has obtained some high-level rights in the logistic space structure," the system said honestly. "Even if this great old one was really bored, he wouldn't steal a thermometer from you, right?" Meg still didn't believe it. Chapter 2068. The importance that the system placed on him determined the importance that Meg placed on him. Ever since he arrived in this world, the system had always acted as if everything was under its control. However, this time it seemed to be panicking. Of course, it could also be that it was angry because it had no evidence that something had been stolen. The existence of the Great Old Ones had been confirmed, and Meg had even cooked half of it. However, such an existence would destroy the world at the drop of a hat. How could it have the time to go to various farms to steal thermometers and planters? As for a higher civilization, in this world where there were still races that had not broken away from the habit of eating raw meat and drinking blood, Meg did not believe that there was a civilization of a higher level than the system. Judging from the time, could it be Amy's system? Meg suddenly thought of a variable. The system was silent for a while, as if it was analyzing, then said, "The possibility is extremely low. If the system discovered the farm, it should be able to determine that there is another system in this world. It should not contact the other system, let alone interfere with the other system's mission. Aren't all defective systems like you thrown together to raise venomous insects? Can't you just not interfere with each other? There is only one king in this world after all. What about the saying, 'Every dog has its day'?" Meg was a little doubtful. "I repeat myself. This system is a perfect god of cooking system. The existence of that system might just be an accident," the system said seriously. "Then is it possible that there is a higher civilization in this world? Or that their level of civilization is higher than Earth 2050? Meg asked with a serious expression. According to the system's current observations, the existence of an abnormally evolved civilization has not been discovered. Then, it's possible that there is a Wakanda hidden in this ordinary world. Meg smiled. The system was silent for a while, then replied, "This possibility cannot be ruled out for the time being. The system's understanding of this world is limited, and there are still many places that have not been explored. It is impossible to know if a higher civilization was born on this continent in the past tens of billions of years and survived. Also, there is indeed a higher civilization on Earth, but it is not in Wakanda, but in the Void Realm on Kunlun Mountain." This time, it was Meg's turn to be silent. The system's words were too informative. Nothing was impossible in this world. Him being able to come to this world was already an impossible thing. Did a planet with a history of tens of billions of years have a more advanced civilization? Just like until now, he still did not know if the so-called God that the various races served really existed. If it did, where was it? So, the system isn't omniscient. Meg sighed softly. The system's understanding of an unfamiliar world, other than the basic information obtained through the heavenly axiom, can only be obtained through exploration. Meg held his chin and thought for a while. Suddenly, he asked, "I'm suddenly very curious about what the heavenly Tao is. What kind of existence was it? Why did you create the system and distribute it to the various worlds?" The host's question has reached a dangerous level. Please put away these dangerous thoughts. The system warned. If the heavenly axiom is omnipresent and omniscient, Yet it's an unknown and indescribable existence that communicates with the outside world through the system and controls one world after another through the system's host. Then what do you think it's like? Meg's Adam's apple bobbed, and he felt that his thoughts were indeed a little dangerous. The system fell silent, then fell silent again. All right, then let's change the question. Meg closed the ancient book in his hand. If there is indeed a more advanced civilization in this world, and they discover your existence, what will happen next? There are two possibilities. First, as a foreign civilization and a possible large-scale invasion, you will be captured and dissected for research, and they will try to trace back to our origins. Second, the other party may try to establish a new connection with the foreign civilization through you. You will become a bridge of communication, but you will lose your freedom, the system answered. Neither of them sounds good. Meg shook his head. The system has already cut off the logistics system between the farms and the restaurant, and built a new virtual logistics system. The other party is temporarily unable to find the restaurant through the space channel. However, we can't rule out the possibility that they will find you through other channels because we know nothing about them. Meg let out a sigh of relief and said, "There's another question. If a more advanced civilization really exists, will they be responsible for the great old ones? If they join us, it might be easier to deal with those troublesome fellows." The octopus tentacle processing plant is missing a cutting machine. They should know about the existence of the great old ones, and most likely stand on the side of the good faction. Otherwise, destroying the seal would be a piece of cake for them, the system answered. Meg ended the conversation with the system and sat in front of his desk in a daze. The existence of the great old ones was like the sword of Damocles hanging above his head. The existence of a more advanced civilization, and the possibility that they had already discovered his existence, gave him an even bigger headache. Forget it. Let's not care about them for now. No matter how advanced a civilization is, it's still a mortal body. If they really come looking for me, I can only kill them with a sword. Meg shook his head and got up to leave. He went downstairs and put away all the things that might expose the civilization of this world, including Amy's toys and Anne's watercolor pens. He promised them that they could only be used upstairs. Meg did not become arrogant, so he decided to live more like a native in the future. Irina went back to Chaos City again. Meg, who had just eaten kidney in the afternoon, had no choice but to cancel the oyster feast at night to prevent himself from becoming too arrogant. The tavern's business was still pretty good tonight. Although it was not full yet, 100,000 copper coins were still easily earned in one night. Meanwhile, the Titan Tavern opposite had a notice that it was temporarily closed and announced that it had officially entered the rectification phase. Of course, the most eye-catching thing was still that notice. The Titan Tavern announced that it would open the wine cellar that its founder had sealed 30 years ago and would start to serve the authentic Titan wine that had been stored in the cellar for 30 years. Ev was a smart woman. Meg admitted that. After the business ended, Meg sent the last customer away, closed the door, and started cleaning. At this moment, the door of the tavern opened silently behind him. Meg's hand froze instantly. He slowly turned around and looked at the door. His body leaned forward slightly, and he maintained the best posture for drawing his sword. A woman in white tights was standing at the door. She looked at him calmly with her light green eyes and said in the common language that was a little choppy, "I want to drink." Chapter 2069. There was a young and beautiful woman standing at the door. Meg had only seen the white and black tights she was wearing in movies. They were usually sci-fi movies or some kind of drama movies. She had blue-silver hair and light green eyes. The tights showed her perfect figure, but did not allow anyone to have any thoughts of profanity. Because her beautiful face was too cold, it even made people feel cold. Meg did not care about how her tights were incompatible with this world, nor did he care about how cold she looked. He only cared about the feedback given by the Void Gate name, unknown. Race, unknown. Age, unknown. Strength, unknown. Danger, danger, danger. Yes, this woman was a very dangerous existence. Ever since Meg went through the heavenly tribulation with Cthulhu, he had not felt the existence of danger for a long time. At this moment, he felt it from this woman. System, this is the existence of the advanced civilization you mentioned, right? If we capture her, how much can you research? Meg said in his heart. This is on the premise that you can defeat her. Otherwise, you will be the one being dissected. The system quickly replied. If I fight her, what are the chances of winning? 50-50. This is not very auspicious. Meg frowned and immediately relaxed his body. He looked at the woman at the door and smiled. Sorry, the tavern is closed. If you want a drink, please come back tomorrow. Meg knew that they would come sooner or later, but he did not expect them to come so soon. So, he wanted to see if this was an accident. Closed? The woman frowned slightly and looked at Meg with her cold eyes. She seemed to be thinking. Do I need to change the reason? Meg's face twitched. This woman's cold and direct way of talking made him a little uncomfortable. She was indeed here for him and did not hide her intentions at all. Or perhaps she tried to hide her intentions, but because she was too clumsy in expressing it, she exposed it. At the very least, the other party didn't come up with a bunch of discriminatory remarks and then take out handcuffs to make him surrender. This showed that there was still room for negotiation. Since Miss has already opened the tavern's door, please come in. I have wine and meat. Do you have any stories? Mag asked the woman with a smile. The woman only stared at him coldly. Her delicate face was like a block of ice that would not melt for 10,000 years. Even her gaze was terrifyingly cold, as if she had no emotions. System, this can't be a robot, right? An emotionless killer? Meg asked in his heart. In order not to attract the other party's attention, the system has cut off all detection devices. However, what can be confirmed is that the other party is still a carbon-based creature and not a robot, the system replied quickly. Thank you. The woman withdrew her gaze from Meg and stepped into the restaurant. After looking around, she sat down near the door and continued to observe Meg. Meg closed the door again. He felt a little uncomfortable being stared at, so he put on a professional smile. Miss, what would you like to drink? Wine, the woman replied. Meg was speechless. This is a fucking tavern. I know you want a drink. The wine list is on the wall. Meg tried his best to smile. The woman looked up at the wine list on the wall seriously. After a while, she said, a bottle of Maudai, a bottle of whiskey, a plate of cold pig ears, a plate of cold pig tongue, and a plate of drunkard's peanuts. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg walked into the kitchen with a smile. He was curious about this woman's alcohol tolerance. Even if she was from an advanced civilization, as long as she was not a robot, there would always be a weakness. When she was drunk, a somewhat wretched male human in an ordinary tavern. However, this place is 32 meters away from the nuclear energy activation. Moreover, this man is the owner of the house. I might be able to get some useful information from him. She watched the busy man in the kitchen and pondered in her heart. In addition, she also felt an inexplicable aura in this tavern. It was familiar yet unfamiliar. She could not make a precise judgment at the moment. This situation was not common for her, so she did not hypnotize this human directly after entering this tavern. Of course, it was not difficult for her to obtain an ordinary human's memory as long as it did not violate the observer's code. She had sufficient food in her equipment warehouse. The food of the ancient continent was not attractive to her. She ordered food to sit down to learn the behavior of the new residents. Of course, investigating the food of the new residents was also one of the observer's jobs. She observed the tavern calmly. Not long after, her eyes fell on the counter. It was a mahogany counter with a marble countertop. The countertop was as smooth as a mirror, and the sides were smooth and round. It looked simple and low-key, but it made her puzzled. This processing technique seems to be machined. The manufacturing industry of the ancient continent has developed to this extent in 100 years? She recorded this detail in the observer's log. The wine and dishes you ordered. Meg came out with a tray. He put down an open bottle of wine and 3 dishes, then stepped aside. Thank you, she replied calmly, but her eyes were already attracted by the wine and dishes in front of her. The strong aroma of wine drifted slowly from the white porcelain bottle. It made her, who had never drunk wine, feel quite wonderful. The two dishes made of ears and tongue were completely different from what she expected. They even looked a little tempting. This time, it was Meg's turn to stand aside with his arms crossed and looked at she calmly. Did advanced civilizations need to eat? What were their eating habits and tastes? All these made him curious. Feeling Meg's gaze, she frowned slightly. After a moment of hesitation, she picked up the two bamboo sticks called chopsticks and clumsily picked up a peanut. She could see the energy contained in this peanut, and she could also see the various chaotic elements in it, including many pathogenic elements. The diet of the new residents was still not very healthy. This was also an important reason why she did not like to eat their food. The nutrition cream in the equipment warehouse could provide enough nutrition and ensure health at the same time. After a moment of hesitation, she still put the peanut into her mouth. Crunch, the collision between her teeth and the peanut brought about a crispy texture. At the same time, a spicy taste bloomed on the tip of her tongue. The crispy taste burst out in her mouth along with the crumbled peanut. She's eyes suddenly widened with an incredulous expression. This was a taste she had never tasted before. It was wonderful and irresistible. Chapter 2070. It's a very special tavern. That wretched-looking human male cooks a dish called drunkard's peanut. It has an amazing taste. I can't describe the taste because I've never tasted anything like it. It's so mesmerizing and irresistible. Sorry, observers shouldn't describe it like this, but I really can't find a suitable adjective. Other than that, there's also a liquor called Mao Tai. It has an unfathomable name, but it tastes very mellow, smooth, and sweet. The alcohol content is very high, reaching 58%. It has a certain hallucinogenic effect and can also be called intoxication. Observer. She. Code 9527. Discovered an advanced civilization on the Norland continent. Gender, unknown. Race, unknown. Strength, unknown. Looks like a human female, wearing a combat suit made of an unknown metal. However, it eats human food normally and has a good resistance to alcohol. This advanced civilization's level is higher than Earth's 2050. It's an undiscovered race on the Norland continent, so there's no reference information. It might be related to the Skyfall War. Host's ability is too low to capture it. System's authorization level is too low to capture it. It has been marked and will continue to be tracked and observed. The God of Cookery system reported. Meg watched as she drank the whole bottle of Mao Tai with a drunkard's peanut before opening the bottle of whiskey calmly, as if nothing had happened. Has the alcohol tolerance of advanced civilizations evolved as well? Meg raised his eyebrows and felt that he had miscalculated. Perhaps their bodies have the ability to quickly decompose alcohol, the system answered. She poured a glass of whiskey and took a sip. She frowned and looked at the whiskey in the glass doubtfully before glancing at Meg. The faint smoky taste is the characteristic of whiskey, not the quality of the whiskey. When you accept this setting, you'll find that this whiskey is equally fascinating, Meg explained with a smile. It didn't matter if one had a high alcohol tolerance. Mixed with Mao Tai whiskey, the effects were endless. She thought for a while, but she still drank the whiskey in the glass. She narrowed her eyes and savored the faint burnt and smoky taste. It was like a wild horse galloping in her heart. It was indeed a different feeling and drinking experience from the previous bottle. Whiskey, not bad. She nodded slightly, put down the glass, and looked at Meg. Meg looked at her calmly as well. Excuse me, did you activate any high-level machinery in the house 23 meters away from the tavern yesterday? She asked in a voice as cold as electricity. Machinery? What's a machine? Meg looked puzzled, displaying the level of knowledge a person from another world should have. She stared into Meg's eyes for a while and confirmed that he was not lying. She frowned and explained, a machine is a tool or device that can help people reduce the difficulty of their work or save energy. It should be a large machine made of steel. According to the residents around, there was an earthquake yesterday. Didn't you feel it? Of course, I felt the earthquake. The house was visibly shaken. There were even officials who came to ask about it. Meg nodded and said frankly, "But you're talking about the house next door to ours, right? That is indeed my house, but it has always been empty. If Miss wants to take a look, I can open the door for you." "There's no need. I've already seen it." She shook her head slightly, but there was some doubt in her heart. She was hesitant about whether she should search this human's memory. The lie detector showed that he was not lying, which meant that he really knew nothing about the nuclear machine. An ordinary human would not be able to fool the lie detector. "You're quite blunt." Meg raised his brow. The subconscious contempt of a high-level civilization towards a low-level civilization was exposed. However, he was relieved that she was attracted by the nuclear-powered printing machine. Fortunately, Meg had a backup plan and had the system move the printing press to Chaos City. She did not say anything after that and quietly finished the bottle of whiskey and the 3 dishes. Although she maintained her aloof expression, Meg could tell from the frequency of her picking the food that even an existence from an advanced civilization couldn't resist the temptation of good food. Burp, she, who was about to pay the bill, burped, which surprised her a little. As an extremely disciplined person, she had not eaten too much for many years. She did not expect to eat too much in a human's tavern. "Bill, please pack a drunkard's peanut for me." She took out gold coins and put them on the table as she said to Meg.
Okay.
Meg gave her the change and packed a drunkard's peanut for her. The other party drank 2 bottles of high alcohol content and was about to leave with the packed drunkard's peanut as if nothing had happened. Meg was stunned and did not ask a single question. He was not 100% sure that he could keep her here, let alone that she would not send information back in real time during the battle. She walked towards the door with the drunkard's peanut wrapped in a brown paper bag. Footsteps were suddenly heard on the stairs. Meg turned his head and saw and at the stairs. His heart skipped a beat, and he thought to himself, "This is bad." She stopped in her tracks and suddenly turned around. Her light green eyes stared sharply at the girl standing at the stairs with a picture album in her arms. And also noticed she and showed a polite smile when she saw her staring at her. "This is my daughter, Anne. She can't speak, but she likes to draw. She's very cute, isn't she?" Meg introduced with a smile and walked to her side naturally. He leaned his body slightly to ensure that he could react to She's actions immediately. "There's something wrong with you." She's gaze fell on Meg again. A high-tech black anti-material rifle appeared in her empty right hand. Meg's eyelids twitched a few times. It was an anti-material rifle that was even more exaggerated than the Barrett. Its strong lines seemed to be able to absorb the dark luster of light. There was no stand, and it was carried by this thin woman single-handedly. A woman in white skin-tight armor with a pack of drunkard's peanut in one hand and a black anti-material rifle in the other. This scene seemed a little funny, but Meg felt an extremely strong sense of danger. He wasn't sure if his sword or her spear was faster, and was right beside him, and Amy was still upstairs. He could not retreat. "I'm just a wine cellar. I don't understand what you're talking about." Meg tried to speak as calmly as possible. "No, you've seen Cthulhu. You're already dirty." She shook her head slightly, and her gaze fell on Anne. She frowned slightly. "She also has the aura of Cthulhu, and it's very strong." Chapter 2071. When she recognized Anne's origin, Meg knew that this matter could not be settled peacefully. The existence of an advanced civilization was not to be underestimated. She even knew that he had seen Cthulhu and found out Anne's identity in an instant. One had to know that even Irina, who was a light elemental mage, did not notice anything unusual about Annie. "Actually, I'm quite curious about who you are. Are you a god or an existence like those sealed guys?" Meg stood in front of and looked at she. She raised the sniper rifle in her hand and aimed at Meg. She said coldly, "I'm she, an ancient one. I'm not a god or a sealed invader. I'm an observer. Now, you're under arrest." "An ancient one?" Meg raised his eyebrows slightly and thought of the ancient race in the Cthulhu mythos that had the head of a starfish and a spindle-like appearance. Clearly, This woman who called herself she had an appearance that was more in line with human aesthetics and an unimaginable technological civilization. Moreover, her words also revealed a very important piece of information: the sealed invader. The great old dominators were classified as invaders in their civilization system. Judging from her previous reaction, the Ancient One should be extremely hostile to Cthulhu and the other sealed great old dominators. Her identity was an observer. Listen to this title. It was a sense of superiority that a higher civilization had over a lower civilization. If this were a fantasy world, she would be in existence like an Empyrean walker. If your target is also the guy who escaped the seal, maybe we can sit down and talk instead of fighting to the death here. Meg looked at she calmly. The Tiond Du sword appeared beside him and pointed at she. I know you're strong, and I'm strong too. Before you kill me, I'm confident that I can kill you. Shishi's expression turned grave as she looked at the black sword that suddenly appeared. The heavy sword had no edge, but at this moment, it gave her a feeling that it was extremely sharp. She also vaguely felt that her aura was locked onto. She was not unfamiliar with this feeling. When she raised the sniper rifle in her hand, she could instantly lock onto the opponent's aura. When the man took out his sword, he did the same thing. He was indeed very strong. That was a fact. Is this the ability that Cthulhu gave you? She looked into Meg's eyes and asked. The upper limit of the new resident strength had appeared several thousand years ago, and it was no longer possible for a powerhouse to surpass the limit of level 10 to appear, but his strength had clearly exceeded this limit. Meg shook his head slightly. No, this is my ability to reseal him. Reseals? She's eyes flickered, and a hint of surprise finally appeared on her cold face. She looked at Meg and asked, Did you reseal Cthulhu in the central seal zone? I can only be considered as a participant. This is not something that can be accomplished by one or two people. Meg shook his head and said sincerely, I'm Meg Alex, a knight. I don't know what kind of existence the Ancient Ones are, but if you also see the evil existence sealed here as enemies, then we can be friends. She scrutinized Meg and was silent for a moment before saying, You know what I'm concerned about. And go upstairs first. Don't let Amy come downstairs, Meg turned and said to Anne, and looked at Meg, and then at she. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded obediently and went upstairs with the picture album in her arms. After making sure that and had gone upstairs, Meg looked at she and said, I've seen Cthulhu before, so it's not strange for me to face an opponent. Moreover, I almost lost myself and exchanged my soul with her. She did not say anything, and only looked at him. It was, and who saved me at the critical moment. That bolt of lightning separated her from Cthulhu. She's the embodiment of kindness, and there's not a trace of evil in her. She's like a newborn baby, so I adopted her as my daughter and hid her origin from everyone, Meg said. The embodiment of kindness? She's eyes showed that she was thinking. She had received professional training, but she had never heard of this saying. However, Meg did not look like he had sold his soul to Cthulhu. Otherwise, she would have noticed it the moment she saw him. That girl had Cthulhu's aura, but was as pure as a piece of white paper, which puzzled her as well. I can't fully trust your words right now, nor can I accurately judge the girl's situation. I need to take you back and let the elders make a judgment, she said to Meg. I'm sorry, but I can't accept this proposal. And is my daughter not an item that needs to be evaluated? Meg shook his head and looked at she seriously. Perhaps the Ancient Ones are a higher level of existence. You're powerful, but please don't underestimate a father's determination to protect his daughter. She's not a demon. She's just a little girl who has just started to come into contact with the world and has a beautiful vision of everything. She looked at Meg. Meg looked at she. With the gun against the sword, the atmosphere was extremely cold. After a long time, she put down the anti-material rifle in her hand and looked at Meg. She said in a cold voice, Do you know where to find the lower half of Cthulhu's body that escaped from the seal? I don't know. Meg put down his sword. But I should know something that you don't. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. You're my brother, the system said in admiration in Meg's heart. I'm your father. Don't get the seniority wrong, Meg replied. Meg and she had a short and calm conversation. If Elizabeth's coldness was to keep people away and make people feel pity for her after understanding her, then she's coldness was true indifference. Meg felt like he was talking to an emotionless killer. It was a mechanical conversation without any emotion. The Dragon Clan, rank star. I'll find him. She nodded slightly. This was the only valuable information she got from Meg. Meg hesitated for a moment before saying, he's a friend of mine. If you find him, even if it's the worst-case scenario, I hope you can let me see him again. I can't guarantee that, she replied coldly. Fortunately, Meg was used to her way of talking. Even if I don't take the girl away, I'll take some of her hair or nails back. We need to study what kind of existence she is, she said to him. Meg shook his head and said with a serious expression, I won't give you anything of hers. I also hope you won't try to take her away. Otherwise, I'll kill you even if you're a god. This world isn't what you see. Your strength is relative, she warned coldly. There's a limit to the strength of the ancient, isn't there? Otherwise, why would they sit back and watch those seals age after thousands of years? Meg asked with a smile. Chapter 2072. Anne's existence was special. She was a split from the Great Old One, but she had a kind soul. Perhaps she had the powerful ability of the Great Old One. Perhaps she also had a long life and a strong body. She was young, but she must be very malleable. If Anne was taken away by the Ancient One, she might become a cold mission execution machine like Xiangxi, or even be dissected for research. When he brought Anne home, he was determined to protect her with all his might, even at the cost of his life. Therefore, he wanted to make the Ancient One give up on this idea from the beginning, at least not while he was still alive. She looked at Mag with furrowed brows. This was a stubborn human, and also a troublesome fellow. She's a new life. She's different from Cthulhu. She should have the right to live a normal life, just like a girl. Meg picked up the mermaid album from the counter and threw it to She. She also has the dream of becoming a cartoonist. This child has an extraordinary talent in this aspect. She caught the album. The mermaid on the cover should be from the Lantis tribe. The painting was very delicate and beautiful, showing the mermaid's playfulness and cuteness perfectly. She thought of the album that the girl was holding in her arms when she went downstairs. There seemed to be a rabbit and a turtle on the cover, which looked quite cute. Only you and I know about this at the moment. If possible, I hope you can keep this a secret for me. Meg looked at She and said sincerely and seriously, there's no evil in this world for no reason. I hope she can become a kind and interesting girl. I'll evaluate this incident and deal with it accordingly. She put away the album and did not immediately express her opinion. Instead, she said, but now we can talk about the earthquake 2 days ago.
I'm sure it was caused by you.
Yes, it was caused by me. Meg nodded honestly. You're not an honest human. She frowned slightly. He had actually fooled the lie detector. His earlier answers had not triggered any reaction from the lie detector at all. A human's body also has unlimited potential, but a machine has a limit, Mag said calmly. What's that? According to the manual, it's a nuclear-powered printer, Meg said. Nuclear-powered printing press? She was surprised. The ancients' technological level was extremely high. Nuclear power had long been used in many aspects of life, including transportation. However, the discovery of a nuclear-powered printing press on the Norland continent was a little too abrupt in a world where steam engines had only just begun to be used. Where did you get this printing press? Is it a foreign civilization? She's expression turned solemn. The invasion of foreign civilizations was an extremely serious matter. Back then, when Cthulhu and the other outer gods and their servant races descended, it almost brought a calamity to the ancients. Meg shook his head and said, no, it's an old equipment warehouse dug out from the depths of the ground. There are a few machines and some scattered books inside, including the printing machine. Can you show me those things? I've already sent the printing press back to Chaos City. I can go and get the other things for you. Meg turned and went upstairs. After a while, he came down with an oversized wooden box and placed it in front of she. She opened the box, and what entered her eyes were 24 old 9-year compulsory education textbooks, 3 years of college entrance examination, and 5 years of mock exercises. There were also 2 Dragon Ball comics, as well as some old CRT TV sets, old-fashioned radios, aircraft carrier models, Thanos figurines, Black Panther figurines, Ultraman shape-shifting machines, and other strange objects. She's expression became much more solemn as she looked at the terrifying Thanos figurines. This might be the concrete appearance of a certain outer god. She could not read the square words written on those old books at all. She needed to bring them back and let the wise ones in her race decipher them. That's all. You can take them all if you need, Meg said frankly. Thank you. She put the box into the equipment warehouse and looked at Meg with less vigilance. I'll find Josh and Rankster as soon as possible. If you have news of them, please contact me immediately. Happy working with you. Meg reached out his hand to her. She glanced at his hand, nodded slightly, and turned to leave. Hey, woman. Meg touched his hair and watched she, who had put away the heavy sniper rifle, disappear at the entrance of the restaurant. Only then did he truly breathe a sigh of relief. System, do you think the wise ones of the ancients will get lost in the sea of mock exercises? Meg closed the door and suddenly felt a little sorry for the wise ones who were about to be baptized by the sea of knowledge. You're a little naughty this time. This was prepared by the system according to Meg's request. Since there is an advanced civilization, does it mean that there are gods in this world? Are they just hiding in places unknown to us? So they can establish contact with their successors or clansmen in some way. Meg wondered. For now, there is such a possibility, the system replied. Moutai was extremely delicious and was a rare wine in the underground city. Moreover, this tavern also had a wine called whiskey that had a special smell of smoke. After one got used to it, it was equally fascinating. However, the owner of this tavern had another identity. His real name was Meg Alex, and he was now the strongest human. He was also the strongest among all the major races in the Norland continent that had been detected so far. He had already broken through the 10th tier limit and could pose a threat to me. He once participated in the battle to seal Cthulhu's upper body and made a very important contribution in that battle. In that battle, Cthulhu was attacked by lightning, and a part of its kind soul split off and turned into a girl. She looked at the half-written observer's diary in front of her and thought for a while. She silently deleted the last sentence before continuing to write. I made contact with him and obtained important information about the seal under Sky Island being destroyed. This matter is related to the Frost Dragon Tribe's chief, Rankster. I need to find him as soon as possible. There was also a new development regarding the nuclear power incident in Rodu. It was caused by a nuclear-powered printing press. This item was excavated by Meg Alex from an underground cavern. It was also excavated together with an equipment warehouse. There were many special items in it, including dozens of ancient books written in the alien language. I have obtained them and will send them back to the underground city for research as soon as possible. It might be related to the extraterrestrial civilization. Observer. Code 9527. Chapter 2073. This is a dangerous world, but there are opportunities in the midst of danger. So, today's mission: walk bravely into the unknown. Young mistress, please head to the breakfast shop 500 meters away and buy breakfast for the whole family. You will receive a prize wheel upon completion of the mission. That's it? Amy sat on the edge of the bed and swung her short legs. This is indeed a challenging mission for a 3.5-year-old child, but I believe that young mistress will be able to complete this extremely challenging mission. The system encouraged. This is something I could do when I was 3 years old. Amy pursed her lips and corrected it seriously. Besides, I'm 4 years old now, not 3.5-year-old. Although she felt that the mission was too simple and not challenging at all, Amy still jumped out of bed and quietly changed her clothes before going downstairs. Meg, who was doing his morning exercise on the rooftop, heard the commotion and looked out from the balcony. He saw Amy, who was wearing a white down jacket, skipping away in the snow like a little snowball. Behind her, Ugly Duckling was following closely, looking as if it had not woken up yet. "Where's Amy going?" Meg looked at the little fellow, who was usually sleeping soundly. Her abnormal behavior was most likely because she had received a new mission from the system. Just as Meg was wondering if he should follow and take a look, Amy turned into a breakfast shop 500 meters away. "Is she hungry?" Meg raised his eyebrows. For a moment, he couldn't tell if this was Amy's idea or a mission from the system. Amy carried Ugly Duckling in her arms and walked into the breakfast shop. The door was ajar, and there was a fireplace burning in the breakfast shop, giving it a warmth that was completely different from outside. As soon as she entered, an expectant smile appeared on Amy's face because there was still an enticing aroma of food in the air. It was still early, and there were only 5 or 6 people eating breakfast in the breakfast shop. When they heard the door open, they instinctively looked in the direction of the door, and then their eyes were all attracted by the beautiful little girl standing at the door. What an exquisite and adorable little girl. Her fluffy white clothes accentuated her small and adorable face. Even a porcelain doll could not compare to her exquisite facial features. She was also hugging a round, black and white exotic beast in her arms, looking extremely adorable. Just when everyone thought that she had come with an adult, the little girl had already walked to the counter by herself. She stood on her tiptoes and said in a childish voice, "Boss, can I pack breakfast?" The breakfast shop owner looked at the tiny Amy and glanced in the direction of the entrance. Seeing that there were no adults coming in from outside, he smiled and said, "Little girl, you can have your breakfast takeaway, but what about your parents? Let your parents buy it. You might not be able to take it away later." "It's okay, I have money. Moreover, no matter how much it costs, I can still take it away," Amy said with a serious expression. She even took out a gold coin and showed it to the shopkeeper. "This." The boss hesitated. The little fellow was really too small, and the breakfast in the store was quite big. He really couldn't let her carry it by herself. "Miss, isn't she Mr. Hades's daughter?" Mara asked in surprise. "It's her." AI Faye, who was sitting in the corner, nodded. She also looked at Amy with a hint of surprise and said, "I didn't think that little fellow would come out to buy breakfast by herself. I want this flatbread made from corn, 3 of them. Then I want this soup that looks pretty good, 3 bowls. And this egg, I want 4 of them, and this. Amy was already eagerly ordering. It looked like there were a lot of things that she wanted to eat. The customers all looked at Amy with surprise. They didn't think that not only did she want to buy breakfast to take home, but it also looked like she wanted to buy breakfast for a lot of people. Her parents were really magnanimous to let such a beautiful little girl go out by herself. If she were to be stolen by someone, she would definitely cry to death. The shopkeeper packed all the food according to Amy's request, but didn't serve any soup. He looked at Amy with a smile and said, "Little girl, you can't take the soup with you. Also, there are too many things here, so you should let your parents carry them. You still have to carry your cute little bear." "It's okay, it can do it." Amy casually tossed Ugly Duckling aside. Meow. Ugly Duckling raised its head and meowed with a hint of resentment. "Air." The shopkeeper was still a little hesitant. At this moment, a gentle voice sounded from behind. "Boss, give me the food. This is the daughter of the owner of the new Saipan Tavern across from our house. I'll help her carry it back. Also, give me 3 bowls of soup. I'll get Mara to bring it back for you later." Amy turned around and looked at Ify. Realization dawned on her as she said, "It's you, beautiful big sister." "Yes. Why did little Amy set out to buy breakfast alone?" Ify patted Amy's head with a smile. This little girl was so adorable, and her mouth was so sweet. "So she's the daughter of the owner. All right, with Mrs. Ify taking care of her, then there won't be any problems." The shopkeeper was enlightened and immediately scooped 3 bowls of soup. He carefully placed them in food boxes and handed them to Mara. "How much is it? I'll pay the bill together." Ify took out her purse. "I have 52 copper coins in total." Please give me 48 copper coins. Amy had already handed over her gold coins. Are you going to ask Big Sister to treat you to breakfast? Ify asked with a smile. Amy said with a serious expression, Father said that even if it's a gift from beautiful Big Sister, I can't casually accept it. Girls have to protect themselves when they're outside. Mr. Hades is really a good father. Ify nodded and didn't force her. She took out the money and paid for her own bill. Amy refused Ify's help. She hugged the big bag of breakfast that the shopkeeper handed to her and left the breakfast shop with Ify. Are there guests at home? Why did you buy so much food? Ify looked at the big paper bag that Amy almost couldn't hold. It was enough for at least 6 people. No, half of it is for me. Amy shook her head and said, Half. Ify stared. It's a little, isn't it? Amy also showed a thoughtful expression. It's quite a lot. Ify hurriedly shook her head. This half bag of food was enough for her breakfast for several days, and this little girl actually thought it was too little. But did Mr. Hades ask you to come out and buy breakfast? Ify asked Amy. Although this breakfast shop wasn't far away, it was too unreliable for a little girl like Amy to come out and buy breakfast alone. It would be terrible if she bumped into bad guys. The security in Rodu wasn't as good as it seemed. No, I snuck out myself. Father might still be sleeping. I just wanted to buy breakfast for him so that he could sleep a little longer. Amy shook her head with a smile. Chapter 2074. AI Faye accompanied Amy to the entrance of the tavern, and just as she was about to knock, the door opened from the inside. Did Xiao AI go to buy breakfast by herself? Meg asked with a smile as he looked at the breakfast in Amy's arms. Yeah, I went to buy breakfast for everyone. Their breakfast looks pretty good. Amy nodded her little head. Good girl. Meg rubbed Amy's head with a smile before turning to AI Faye. Good morning, Miss AI Faye. Good morning, Mr. Hades. I just ran into Xiao AI at the breakfast shop, so I dropped her off. AI Faye smiled. Thank you. Meg thanked her. AI Faye took the food box from Mara's hands and handed it over. This is the breakfast shop's specialty soup, and they don't usually let you take it out. I'm quite familiar with the owner, so I got 3 bowls. After you guys eat, I'll have Mara send the bowls and food box back. Okay, thank you. I'll send it back in a bit. There's no need for Miss Mara to make the trip. Meg carefully took the food box before turning to AI Faye. By the way, how are the components for the distillation equipment coming along? I was just about to go to the blacksmith shop to take a look. I should be able to get them today, but I was afraid that the blacksmith would neglect them, so I want to get them myself, AI Faye said. The components are all here. Miss AI Faye, come and let me know. I'll help you assemble and adjust it. Meg nodded. Thank you in advance, Mr. Hades. AI Faye gratefully said before leaving with Mara. Big Sister AI Faye is a good person. If it weren't for her, the owner wouldn't have sold that soup to me, Amy said as she looked at AI Faye's back. Yeah, she's a good girl. Meg nodded with a smile as he looked at the food box in his hand and the big bag of food in Amy's arms. Why did you think of buying breakfast today? Because Father works so hard every day, so I wanted to buy breakfast. That way, you don't have to make breakfast for us and we can sleep more. Amy's little face was filled with seriousness. Good girl. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head, feeling warm inside. Meg carried the food box into the house and said casually, by the way, if the wishing well works today, ask it to give us a car. It's best if it's an all-terrain vehicle. That way, it'll be convenient to buy groceries. An all-terrain vehicle? Amy thought for a moment and memorized it. Life experience system. Motherfucker. Congratulations, little master, for completing the mission of buying breakfast. One chance to turn the wheel. The system's voice sounded in AI Mi's mind. Little mistress, please go and collect it yourself. I want an all-terrain vehicle, Amy reminded him. The roulette wheel is a probability lottery. The system cannot guarantee what the little master will win, the system explained. Then you just have to write all-terrain vehicle in every grid, Amy said seriously. The system. If you don't want to write, then I won't smoke anymore. Humph, it's boring, Amy said proudly. All right, all right. The system humbled itself. That's right. Good girl. Amy smiled again. Meg opened the food box and took out 3 bowls of soup with various vegetables and a few green onions scattered on top. It looked pretty good. AI Faye called this soup confusion soup, which was similar to Hanan's confusion soup, and just came downstairs and looked at the food on the table with a surprised expression. She pointed at Amy and asked in sign language, "Amy, did you go out and buy this?" "Yes, big sister, and come and sit down. I just bought this." "It's a huge bag," Amy said proudly as she put the paper bag in her hand on the table. Apart from the confusion soup, Amy also bought a bunch of food such as corn cakes, boiled eggs, rice crust, and so on. She spread them all out and took up half the table. Meg wasn't too worried about not being able to finish all of it. At least half of it would go into Amy's stomach. "Come on." Thanks to Meg, I got to eat breakfast bought outside. Meg distributed 3 spoons and scooped a spoonful of confusion soup into his mouth. It was a thick soup with starch, radish, lean meat, and some kind of mushroom. It was salty and tasted delicious. Eating a bowl of it on a winter morning warmed him up from the stomach to the outside. He felt as if he had come back to life. The corn cake was cut into small pieces and tasted pretty good. It was probably made by boiling corn and then breaking it up before adding some flour. It was fluffy and had the fragrance of corn. It was a very good coarse grain cake. Meg ate a boiled egg. The rice crust was too hard and wasn't suitable for the elderly, so he could only politely decline. However, the 2 little fellows were happily munching on the food. After Amy was full, she went to play with Ugly Duckling, and, on the other hand, was not in a hurry to go upstairs to draw. She sat down opposite Meg. "And is there anything you want to talk to me about?" Meg asked, and with a smile, and hesitated for a moment and said in sign language, "Was that person yesterday a bad person?" "She's not a bad person. She should be considered a good person." Meg shook his head. It seemed that she had scared, and when he mentioned the heavy sniper rifle last night. "And she liked the picture album you drew, so I gave her the mermaid." Anne's eyes lit up and a smile appeared on her lips. "I just don't know if she'll be willing to return it to me after reading it. If she doesn't, and we'll have to draw a new one before it can be printed." Meg sighed softly. "It's okay, I can draw a new one," and quickly said in sign language, "By the way, I saw you take a new picture book when you went downstairs yesterday. Is it a new work?" Meg asked curiously. "Yes," and got up and went upstairs. After a while, she came down with a picture book and handed it to Meg. This picture book was relatively thin, and the cover had a vivid drawing of a tortoise and a rabbit. It was a story about a tortoise and a rabbit race. This was a picture book for younger children. Meg had told this fable to the 2 children before, but he did not expect Anne to draw it. Meg flipped through it. The drawing style was cute, and the rhythm was smooth. It was fully capable of combining education with entertainment. Anne's drawing is getting better and better. The drawing style is cute, and the story is very suitable for children. Meg closed the picture book and resisted the urge to add a pepper rabbit recipe at the back. After all, the rabbit was so cute. Whether it was braised or barbecued, it was delicious. Anne's face lit up with a happy smile. On the other hand, Amy had already opened the big wheel in her mind. She looked at the wheel full of all-terrain vehicles and clicked start. After the needle spun a few times, it fortunately stopped on the all-terrain vehicle. "I got you a..." Amy was pleasantly surprised. "This is a 100% probability. Is it possible to not get it?" The system wanted to cry, but had no tears. Chapter 2075. Looks like the system is a little shabby. Meg frowned as he looked at the miniature mountain motorcycle parked in the backyard. Wow, it looks so cool. Amy could wait to change into the small armor and put on the helmet with much effort. She straddled the motorcycle and transformed into a little rider. However, even though it was a miniature motorcycle, it was still very big for Amy, so it was inevitable that some problems would arise. For example, because her legs were too short, she couldn't kick off the supporting leg herself. If she wanted to drive the motorcycle away, she had to find someone to help her. After kicking the air a few times with her short legs, Amy tilted her head and begged Meg, "Father, help me kick it." "Do you know how to drive it?" Meg asked with a smile. The wishing well told me how to drive it." Amy nodded. "But if you drive it, what will you do when you want to stop?" Meg asked with a smile. He couldn't be a happy-go-lucky guy who never went offline, could he? Well, Amy pondered seriously and found that this was indeed a problem that needed to be considered. Amy's gaze quickly fell on and her eyes lit up. "Then let Big Sister and sit on my motorcycle. That way, when I want to stop the motorcycle, she can use her long legs to stabilize it." "That's a good idea." Meg nodded. This was a two-seater motorcycle, so it was just right for her and to sit on. However, he reached out to pull out the car key and said, "There are too many people on the road during the day, so it's not suitable to drive it out. We'll drive it out at night when there's no one on the road." "All right, then we'll go at night." Amy jumped off the motorcycle, took off her helmet, and placed it on Ugly Duckling's head. Ugly Duckling lay on the ground and searched for its head for a long time before pulling its fat head out of the helmet. It looked around in confusion. After lunch, Effie came to ask Meg to help install the distillation equipment. Meg went to the Titan Tavern. A few new parts were placed in the cellar, and the original distillation equipment had been dismantled and placed in a corner. The layout of the wine cellar was also redesigned according to Meg's previous design plan. Some unnecessary things were discarded, and some of the processes and procedures were simplified, making the entire wine cellar look more simple. "Mr. Hades, do you need help? These parts are very heavy." Before AI Faye could finish his sentence, he saw Meg lift up a sealed metal bucket and place it on the stove beside him. F and Mara's eyes widened upon seeing this. This metal bucket was around the height of a grown man, and it had taken 4 burly men to carry it in, but Meg was able to lift it up with ease with one hand. How could he be so powerful? "It's a little heavy." Meg also realized that he seemed to have violated his character setting. He twisted his wrist and covered it up. "Please help yourself." AI Faye smiled. She couldn't see through her neighbor anymore. Not only did he have shocking wealth, but he also had amazing winemaking skills and incredible strength. The blacksmith that AI Faye had found was quite good. Although the various parts did not fit together seamlessly, there was not too much of a mistake. Meg got an electric welding tool from the system and welded all the parts of the distillation equipment together. He also applied a layer of anti-corrosion coating on them. AI Faye and Mara, other than pouring tea at the side, had a look of amazement on their faces like fangirls. In their eyes, Meg was like a magic caster with outstanding skills. He used a mysterious light to glue all the parts together and turn them into a huge piece of equipment that was almost as tall as 2 people from those shapeless pieces of metal. The distillation equipment has been adjusted. Next, I will teach you how to use this equipment to brew Titan wine. Meg took off his gloves and looked at AI Faye, who was standing at the side with tea in her hands.
"Oh, okay."
AI Faye nodded quickly and served the tea that was already a little cold. It wasn't easy to teach a woman who had never come into contact with modern machinery how to use a relatively advanced distillation equipment. Fortunately, Meg remembered his golden finger and tapped on the parts that he didn't know. AI Faye quickly learned how to use it. Other than that, Meg also made some improvements to his Titan wine brewing process based on his own experience and taught it to AI Faye. "Have you learned it?" Meg asked as he retracted his finger from AI Faye's forehead. "Yes." AI Faye's eyes lit up. The many problems in winemaking that had been troubling her all these years were all solved easily today. She had never felt that winemaking was so simple. With this set of equipment, it would become even simpler. This feeling was too carefree and satisfying. "Mr. Hades, She grabbed Meg's hand and blushed. Her excitement was beyond words. "Miss AI Faye, don't be like this." Meg retracted his little hand and took a step back.
"There are still people here."
"It's not appropriate." Miss, I'll go buy some groceries first." Mara turned around and left. "It's a little late. I should go back and cook for the children." Meg looked at his watch and said, AI Faye also realized that she seemed to have forgotten herself. She blushed and said, "Thank you so much, Mr. Hades. I was too excited just now and scared you."
It's okay.
I appreciate your desire for knowledge. If you have any questions, you can come to me at any time. Meg nodded. Anytime? AI Faye subconsciously flipped her hair. It had to be said that AI Faye was indeed a very charming woman. She was as mature as a peach. Even Meg was dazed for a moment. Not at night. Meg clearly refused. Okay. AI Faye nodded slightly. There seemed to be a little disappointment in her voice. Then goodbye. Meg said goodbye and left. What's wrong with me? AI Faye, you're not that kind of woman. AI Faye looked at Meg leaving the tavern. She stomped her feet and blushed. But her eyes still couldn't help but follow Meg's back until he entered the Saipan Tavern. It's over so soon? Mara, who just took the money and came downstairs, looked at AI Faye with some surprise. Damn girl, what are you thinking about all day long? AI Faye's face was even redder. She reached out and pinched Mara's waist. Miss, please forgive me. I didn't say anything. Mara dodged while feeling wronged. Meg hummed a tune as he returned to the tavern. As soon as he entered the door, he felt the unusual atmosphere. He looked up and just happened to meet the eyes of Irina, who was drinking tea at the door with her legs crossed. His legs trembled, and he almost knelt on the spot. Chapter 2076. I went to install the equipment at the tavern opposite. I did what I promised 2 days ago. I drank 3 cups of tea and came back right after I was done. I was going to cook dinner for the children. Before Irina could ask, Meg had already told her everything. That's it. Irina looked at him with a half smile. Yes, that's it. Meg nodded and sat down opposite Irina. He poured her a glass of water before changing the topic. I have something important to tell you. Is it the devil? Irina looked at Meg with a serious expression. It's not the devil. It's the Ancient Ones, Meg said in a hushed voice. The Ancient Ones? What's that? Irina frowned. Last night, a lady suddenly barged in after the opening hours with a weird weapon. She claimed to be an observer of the Ancient Ones, and she could tell that I had interacted with the devil before. She thought that I might have already exchanged souls with the devil and wanted to kill me, Meg said. Is she very strong? She's not weaker than me. Meg nodded. Irina's expression suddenly became serious. She knew Meg's strength very well. There was no one who could match him on the Norland continent. However, that woman's strength was not weaker than him. What exactly are the Ancient Ones? Meg deduced. I'm guessing that it could be a civilization of a higher level. They have even more power and weapons, but they chose to hide and didn't show themselves on the Norland continent. We couldn't even find any traces of them in the ancient records. What happened after that? Her target was the devil, and so was our target. In a way, we can be friends. Besides, she didn't have absolute confidence that she could walk out of the tavern safely after killing me, so we had a talk and established contact. Meg took out the communication device that she had given him. It was a phone that could make voice calls. Irina looked at the communication device for a while and said, if their target is also the devil, it doesn't seem to be a bad thing for us. It's better than us not being able to find Josh and the devil that escaped the seal. From this point of view, yes. Meg nodded and looked in the direction of the stairs. The 2 children should still be playing upstairs. There's another very important thing that I feel like I have to tell you. Irina raised her hand and set up a soundproof cover. I'm sorry that I lied to you about Anne's background, Meg said apologetically. So you've been fooling around behind my back. Irina raised her eyebrows, and the air seemed to have become a little chilly. Meg quickly waved his hands. No. It's not like that. Then what is it? Actually, Anne is the pure and kind personality of the devil that was struck by lightning when I sealed it outside Chaos City. That day, I almost lost myself in the devil's illusion. She was the one who guided me and saved my life, Meg explained. Then, and at that time, I found her to be like a newborn child. She was innocent and kind. I was worried that others would hurt her, so I took her away from the seal and later decided to adopt her. She's a kind child. You know that, Meg said with a serious expression. Yes, and is a good child. Irina nodded her head. After pondering for a moment, she asked, so that woman came yesterday and discovered Annie? Meg nodded.
Yes.
The ancient seemed to have a unique way of detecting the devil's aura. She could tell that and was different at first glance and requested it taken back for research. I'm very glad that you kept her. And is like Amy. They're both our children. I can't let her take her away. So, I used my emotions and my sword to keep in. Meg nodded, but he was a little worried. But I feel that she won't give up so easily. After all, from a certain perspective, and is also a devil in their eyes. Even if she's a kind devil, it won't do. Irina looked at Meg with a gentle gaze. She reached out to hold his hand. I will stand with you to protect our child. Since there's a higher limit in this world, then I will become stronger than I am now. I won't let anyone threaten us anymore, Meg said with a serious expression. AI Faye was busy in the winery. Following Meg's method and her own research over the years, she couldn't wait to use the new equipment to make the first batch of Titan wine. Compared to the original complicated process of making Titan wine and the difficult-to-control distillation equipment, Meg's improved process was much simpler. The distillation equipment was also much easier to use. Mr. Hades taught you how to make Titan wine. Didn't he also learn how to make it? Mara, who was tending the fire, looked up at AI Faye and asked. AI Faye was surprised, but then she smiled and said, Mr. Hades' Moutai isn't inferior to Titan wine. With his intelligence, if he really wanted our Titan wine, why would he design and build this winery for us? Yes, Mr. Hades is smart and capable, but he's a little fast. Mara nodded. There's something wrong with you, girl. AI Faye glanced at her. Mara stuck out her tongue and pretended that she didn't say anything. Boss, are you going to the wine tasting conference tomorrow? With the quality of Moutai and whiskey, you can definitely win the gold medal. Yes, none of the gold medal wines in the past years can compare to Moutai. Each year is worse than the last. If you win the gold medal, you'll probably have to line up to drink in the future. Today's customers came in, and many asked Meg if he was going to attend the wine tasting conference. It could be seen that the wine tasting conference had a lot of influence in the circle of wine lovers. Meg smiled and told them that Moutai was going to attend the wine tasting conference. As for why whiskey wasn't going, it was to give other wines a chance. Listen to this. Is this still human language? As Saipan Tavern gradually gained fame through word of mouth, it was only 121 points away from 1,000 popularity. Of course, with the wine tasting conference tomorrow, this difference would become plus 10086. After sending off the last customer, Meg closed the tavern door and stretched. Saipan Tavern was on the right track, and its popularity was gradually increasing. The current tavern space was a bit small, and he was considering whether to open up the shop next door and add more seats. At this moment, Meg's expression suddenly froze, and he turned his head to look at the empty space above him. Irina, who was counting money with Amy behind the counter, also stopped what she was doing and looked in the same direction as Meg. The empty space outside the tavern twisted, and a huge figure appeared. Chapter 2077. And bring Amy upstairs to sleep first. We have something to take care of outside, Meg said to, and as he took off his apron and put it aside, and nodded obediently. She held Amy's little hand and went upstairs without asking anything. What happened? Amy asked with a puzzled expression, and shook her head, but gave her a hug with a smile, assuring her that she would protect her. System, what happened? Amy asked in her heart. A powerful and terrifying unknown creature has appeared outside. Young mistress, please stay put. The system quickly replied. Is it a baddie? It's an unknown creature that's different from any recorded species on the Norland continent. It's very powerful and is not something that young mistress can deal with at the moment, the system replied. Then can you? This system is to assist young mistress. I can attack any creature. Then you can't beat it, idiot. Amy rolled her eyes. She couldn't help but worry about her parents. You protect the two children. I'll take that fellow away from here first, Meg said to Irina before putting on a mask and dashing out of the door. The Titan Tavern was closed for the day, and there were no lights on Romo Street. It was very quiet, and in the void above Saipan Tavern, there was a huge creature floating in the air. It was a three-headed snake with huge bat wings. Its head was like a WIRM's, and it looked ferocious and terrifying. Its scarlet vertical eyes were like red lanterns in the dark. Venom dripped from its sharp fangs onto the ground, and immediately corroded a deep hole in the bluestone ground. The three-headed snake had already locked onto Meg as soon as he stepped out of the door. Hiss, hiss. The giant snake stuck out its tongue and charged toward Meg. So it's really coming for me? Then I'll show you around, Rodu. Meg's lips curled up, and he turned into a blur as he dashed toward the various departments not far away. The giant snake turned around and flew after Meg. At first glance, this giant snake looked like some kind of magical beast, but Meg was more concerned about the demonic aura on its body. The demonic chi that came from the same source as the Great Old One was extremely dense, and he was sure that this was not a simple magical beast that was being controlled, but more like a magical creature with its own intelligence. Meg walked between the Yaman's buildings. After failing to catch him several times, the giant snake began to attack. Blazing fireballs were spat out from the snake's mouth and landed on the houses. Instantly, the buildings collapsed and started a huge fire. It was already late at night, and there was no one in the Yaman. However, this place was very close to the Imperial Palace. Meg could already sense the auras of several experts approaching. Meg and the giant snake destroyed the offices of several departments. Then, they chose a route with fewer people and headed out of the city. Before the snake could leave the city, it was stopped by 2 knights of the 10th rank and a great magician. Meg concealed his aura and stopped not far away to spectate the battle. Who dares to wreak havoc in our road? The leading 10th tier knight yelled at the giant black snake that was being kept at bay by the wall of ice, with a heavy sword in his hand. The other 2 magicians and the knight also wore grave expressions. During this period of time, 20 to 30 10th rank powerhouses had gathered in Rodu, and they had been ordered to be on standby at all times. Earlier, there was a powerful battle near the Imperial Palace. Apart from the powerful beings guarding the palace, the 3 of them were the first to arrive and stop the perpetrator. During this period of time, rumors about demons had been spreading like wildfire, and the hideous creature that they had stopped was giving off a terrifying demonic aura. It was quite similar to the demons that they had imagined. The giant snake that was hovering in midair was over 100 meters in length. It had 3 terrifying heads and a pair of huge bat wings on its back. It was the embodiment of horror and ugliness. Hiss! The giant snake looked down at the 3 people standing on the ground and let loose a sharp roar. It swung its huge tail and slammed it into the ice wall in front of it. The sound of air exploding erupted as the thick ice wall was instantly reduced to shards of ice. At the same time, the 3 snakeheads opened their mouths in unison and blasted 3 massive fireballs down below. Stop it together and wait for reinforcements. The leading knight roared as he stomped a foot into the ground and disappeared on the spot. He appeared above the giant snake in the blink of an eye and drew his long sword before slashing it down. The most powerful trump cards of a 10th rank knight were their sword techniques. Their understanding of the laws of nature allowed them to unleash power that was far beyond their physical limits. A white streak of light pierced through the sky and came crashing down with unstoppable force, threatening to slice the giant snake in half. The magic caster slapped several protective talismans onto his body before hurtling back in retreat. At the same time, he raised his wand high into the air and began to chant a spell. The other 10th rank knight also charged toward the giant snake with his sword in hand. This giant snake was a little strange, and it didn't appear to be a powerful magic beast that had entered Rodu by accident. As such, it was very important for them to work together. The 3 fireballs landed on the street and blasted 3 craters that were several meters deep into the ground. The giant snake seemed to be a little anxious after failing to hit its target and being attacked by 3 10th-rank powerhouses. It flapped its wings violently, and 2 gusts of hurricanes appeared as its body suddenly shifted backward. The giant snake's tail flipped over and swept toward the knight, who was slashing down with his sword in midair. At the same time, one of its heads opened its mouth and bit toward him. This was a rather intense battle. When the other powerful beings arrived, there were only 3 severely injured 10th-rank powerhouses left on the scene. Out to the west of the city, the leading knight only left a sentence before he fainted. "The 5 of you, follow me." A general jumped onto his flying steed and picked out another 5 powerful beings to chase toward the west. On the other side, Meg was riding on Oz and following the giant snake unhurriedly toward the east. This giant snake was more powerful than normal 10th-rank powerhouses. After severely injuring 3 10th-rank powerhouses, it still had the energy to continue chasing after him. "It's about time, Oz. Let's stop." 500 kilometers east of the city, the purple-striped griffin stopped in the air above a bamboo forest.
Who are you?
Meg stood on the purple-striped griffin's back with his hands behind his back and quietly put on a show. The giant snake stopped 100 meters away. It was also injured, and one of its eyes had even been destroyed. However, the area where the eye was shrouded in black demonic aura seemed to be recovering quickly. "I am Cthulhu." Just as it opened its mouth, Meg had already disappeared from the griffin's back. In the next instant, Meg appeared above its head and slammed his heavy sword down heavily. Boom! The giant snake crashed onto the ground and knocked over a large patch of bamboo, creating a deep crater in the ground. "Huh? It can talk?" Meg landed on the purple-striped griffin's back and looked down at the crater with surprise. Chapter 2078. Meg initially thought that it was a level 10 magical beast that was controlled by Cthulhu and had gained some of its demonized abilities, including the ability to heal itself quickly. Looking at the giant snake that had half of its head blown off, he felt that he had underestimated this snake. Hiss! The giant snake let out an angry hiss. "Don't bare your teeth at me, or I'll blow off the rest of your head too." Meg glanced at the other 2 heads. Sometimes, the comfort of a powerhouse was so effective. The giant snake immediately put away its teeth, but its 4 eyes were still staring at Meg, and its red vertical pupils began to rotate slowly. Meg stared at the vertical pupils, and his eyes seemed to be a little dull. After a while, Meg suddenly laughed. "You're still far from being able to do that." Meg's eyes had regained clarity, but the giant snake's eyes were a little dull, and its wings were flapping unconsciously. When the giant snake used its mind control on him, Meg took the initiative and successfully controlled the giant snake with his powerful mind power and mind control ability. "Tell me, what are you?
Why are you looking for me? How did you find me?"
Meg asked. "I'm a servant of Lord Cthulhu, the Terror Hunter. I can feel Lord Cthulhu's aura on you, and I want to know if you know where Lord Cthulhu is." The giant snake replied in a numb tone. "Servant?" Meg frowned. This guy was indeed not a magical beast that was simply controlled by Cthulhu. How many servants does Cthulhu have? Is the Terror Hunter your name, or is it a race? Meg asked again. The great Lord Cthulhu has countless servants, and the Terror Hunter race is just a low-class servant race under Lord Cthulhu. The giant snake replied. Meg's expression became a little solemn, and he said in a low voice, "Where are those servants now? Are they still alive?" "Earth. Earth." The giant snake's eyes suddenly flickered, and it broke free from Meg's control. Its vertical pupils recovered, and it let out a hiss and pounced at Meg. "It's a pity I was so close." Meg sighed regretfully. He raised his sword and chopped off the 2 heads of the snake, leaving only the middle head that was slowly recovering. He knocked it out with a single blow. Sitting on the griffin's back, Meg took out the communicator that she gave him and informed her that he had caught a terrifying hunter. Then he waited in place. About 3 minutes later, the void shook and a star-shaped spaceship appeared, hovering above the bamboo forest. The cabin door opened and she walked out. She first took a look at the unconscious three-headed hydra with 2 severed heads. Her eyes narrowed slightly before looking at Meg, who was sitting on the back of the griffin. Judging from the scene, this was a one-sided battle. This terrifying hunter couldn't even make an effective counterattack. This man was indeed very strong. "This is a terror hunter, one of Cthulhu's servant races," she said. "How did you find it?" "I wasn't the one who found it. He found me." Meg shook his head and said, he sensed Cthulhu's aura on me, so he came looking for me. I lured him here from Rodu." She nodded slightly and landed lightly on the ground. She walked to the terror hunter and placed her right hand on its remaining head. A bluish-silver light lit up in her palm and wrapped around the terror hunter's head. Just when Meg thought she was going to heal that fellow, she had already retracted her hand. There was a fist-sized crystal ball in her palm, and there was a small 3-headed flying snake in the crystal ball. The flying snake that was thrashing around crazily in the crystal ball trying to break through the restrictions was obviously a miniature version of the terror hunter. "Terror hunter, you have violated the first rule of the underground world by coming to the Norland continent. Now, your soul will be arrested and sent back to the underground city for trial," she declared coldly before putting away the crystal ball. Underground world. First rule, underground city. Meg felt like he had obtained some new information. "I want to know how many of these fellows there are. Where are they hiding?" Meg looked at she and asked. "I don't have the authority to tell you these questions," she replied coldly. Meg frowned slightly. He felt that this fellow was like a humanoid system, old-fashioned and cold. "Then do you ancients have a way to eliminate or hide the aura related to Cthulhu on us? It's not a good feeling to have all these strange things coming to me." She looked at Meg and thought for a while before shaking her head. "You're a qualified and attractive bait. Maybe Cthulhu will come back for you." "Then I'm just a fucking tool?" Meg's eyelids twitched. "No, you're just bait," the system corrected. "Fuck. A kind of green plant," the system added harmoniously. Meg looked at she and said, "I can keep the aura on me, but you have to help me hide N's aura. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I'll be able to get her soul before you arrive next time." She glanced at the terror hunter's body on the ground and thought for a while. She took out a ring from the equipment storage and threw it to Meg. "Let her wear this ring. Other than Cthulhu, no one will be able to sense her abnormality." Meg looked at the silver ring in his hand. There was a string of mysterious runes engraved on it. It was cold to the touch, and he could not see anything strange about it. "Thank you." Meg put it away solemnly. Although he felt that this woman was an emotionless robot, she would not lie to him about this kind of thing. "I'll leave this to you. I'll go back first." Meg did not expect to get any more information from her. He patted Ozzy and left. Of course, the job of cleaning up the place should be left to the police. He was just a bait without human rights. She looked at Mag, who had disappeared in the blink of an eye. She looked at the mess around her and frowned. Then, she turned around and returned to the spaceship. The spaceship hovered above the terror hunter's body. A beam of light shone from the bottom of the spaceship and the 3-headed snake's body disappeared. The tragic pit on the ground was also refilled. The spaceship circled above the bamboo forest and entered the void again, disappearing without a trace. The bamboo forest was still a mess, but it looked like the traces left behind by a fierce battle between 2 magical beasts. "This red braised pork, is it really that delicious?" She lay on the floating chair and looked at the glowing red braised pork in the picture book. Her throat moved. After a while, she put down the picture book and got up to take a wine glass from the shelf. She poured herself a glass of wine and grabbed a handful of drunkard peanuts from the box. She sat by the window and drank alone. Chapter 2079. System, can you get an underground world detector? The kind that can pierce through the Earth's crust. I'm highly suspicious that these guys are hiding underground, and perhaps they've even built a new world down there. Meg sat on the griffin's back as he spoke in his heart. I just installed a tracker on her spaceship, the system replied. Isn't a tracker from a low-level civilization like yours designed to increase my chances of being suspected? Meg pursed his lips. That's a high-level tracker that I bought from another system at a high price. It's the latest technology from the M78 Nebula, and it was taken from an Ultraman that had only been in service for 200 years, the system emphasized. Is Ultraman that powerful? Meg was a little skeptical. This is the latest coordinate information of that spaceship. A three-dimensional coordinate map appeared in Meg's mind. Where is it? Meg looked at the blank coordinates. The system was silent for a while before replying. Normal mechanical failures can also occur in high-level civilizations. As a fake mechanical engineer, you should be able to understand, right? Mag rolled his eyes and snapped. You're just a cheapskate. You bought a second-hand, crooked product. Meg was just about to exit when the coordinate map flashed a few times. A faint red appeared, but it quickly disappeared, leaving behind a set of coordinates. The spaceship is now 100 kilometers north of Rodu, and it's at an altitude of 10,000 meters, the system said excitedly. What kind of tracker is it if it can't be located in real time? Meg also had a flying restaurant, but that was a legitimate spaceship. He didn't think he could catch up to it. After ending the topic of tracking, Meg was still thinking about the underground city. After thinking for a while, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. System, do you think this world is three-dimensional, like a 1,000-layer pancake? We think we're on the first layer, but we're actually on the second layer. There's another layer underground, and perhaps another layer in the sky. There's no way that the ancient beings from a high-level civilization would put themselves in a dark underground world to suffer. This means that the so-called underground world is completely different from the underground world in our minds. Furthermore, there was an upper limit to the Norland continent sky. Could it be the previous world's base? The ones living in the underground world are the servants of the ancient ones and the great old ones. What about the ones living in the sky? Meg was a little excited. He felt as if he was about to come into contact with the essence of the world, just like when Magellan proved that the world was round. The system was silent for a long time. Perhaps there is such a possibility. The underground world under the control of the Ancient Ones seems to be very orderly, but the Norland continent allows all the races to fight each other. It's completely like raising parasites. Then where were the so-called gods of the various races? In the sky? Or underground? Meg continued to ponder. Host, this system still needs to remind you that your main mission is only to become the god of cooking in this world. You don't have to explore the unsolved mysteries of the world. As a system, you have to have some goals. A god of cooking doing what a god of war did. Wouldn't that be very cool? Meg said. No, that would only be judged as not doing proper work and having low business ability. Do you really want to be mocked and kicked out of the group chat for the rest of your life as a cooking system? Only with a powerful host can you leave your name in the history of the system and be remembered forever. Meg said passionately. It sounds like that's the case. The system was a little shaken. Do your job well. Go to other systems and get some black technology, or get some elixirs that can make you immortal. After we're done torturing the great old ones, we don't need bicycles anymore. The world will be ours, Meg encouraged. All right, I'll go right away, the system said excitedly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up crazily. When he returned to Rodu, Meg saw Irina with the two children blowing up the streets of Romo Street. Oh, that's not quite right. Irina put a soundproof cover on the motorcycle so that Amy and could fully experience the wildness and feedback of riding the motorcycle, but it didn't affect the nearby residents at all. Amy, who was wearing a black and white helmet and tight black and white battle armor, looked like a little knight as she carried and around the corner and completed a perfect drift before returning to the entrance of Saipan Tavern, and put down her leg and supported herself on the bike. The two of them took off their helmets and laughed happily. You drove very well. You even learned how to drift, Meg said with a smile as he jumped down from Ozzy's back. Amy jumped down from the bike, rushed to Meg, and asked with concern, "Father, are you all right?" I'm fine. Let's go in first." Meg carried her up, waved at Ozzy, and entered the tavern. Irina put away the motorcycle for Amy and brought an inn. "Where's the baddie?" Amy asked Meg. "I chased him away," Meg said with a smile. "Father is really awesome." Amy looked at Meg with admiration in her eyes. "Oh, right, I have a small gift for you." Meg took out 2 boxes and handed the big purple box to Amy and the white one too, and, "What's this?" Amy opened the box, and it was filled with all kinds of snacks that had been changed into local packaging.
Wow.
There's so much yummy food. Amy's eyes lit up, and she immediately took out a bag of chips to munch on, and opened the small box, and there was a silver ring inside. She picked up the ring and looked at it under the light, her eyes full of love. "Try it on and see if it fits," Meg said too, and with a smile, and nodded obediently, and put the silver ring on her index finger. However, her finger was too slender, and the ring was obviously bigger. Just as Anne was about to try it on her other finger, the ring suddenly shrank and fit perfectly on her index finger. "It fits perfectly." Meg's eyes lit up. As expected of a ring from an advanced civilization, it could adjust its size according to the wearer. "Then, Anne can wear it from now on. It's pretty good. I like it very much," Anne said in sign language. She raised her hand and pointed at the light, and a smile appeared on her face as she looked at the ring shimmering under the light. "What was that thing just now?" After coaxing the 2 children to sleep, Irina looked at Meg, who had just finished showering and came out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around him. "It's from Cthulhu's servant race. It's a 3-headed flying snake monster with strength above normal level 10. I lured it out of the city and severely injured it. Then I called that woman to take it away." Meg took off the towel and threw it aside before walking to the bed. Chapter 2080. That woman and that 3-headed serpent could have come from underground. The Ancient Ones had established order there and restricted Cthulhu's servants from coming to the Norland continent. Meg reached into his pocket at the head of the bed and realized that he hadn't smoked in a long time. He couldn't help but feel a little regretful. "There's another world underground?" Irina asked curiously. Her face was slightly red, and she was still a little out of breath. "That might be the case. Perhaps this world is different from what we know." Meg nodded slightly. He looked up at the ceiling with a smile and said, "Perhaps there's another world in the sky. Otherwise, why can't the powerhouses fly to higher places? There seems to be an upper limit to the sky." Irina's eyes widened gradually. She was in disbelief and disbelief. Meg could understand how she felt. After all, the people on the Norland continent should think that they were the center of the world and that the heaven and earth revolved around them. But one day, when they found out that the Norland continent was just a filler sandwiched between 2 continents, they wouldn't feel too good. Irina was silent for a while. She looked at Meg and asked, "If God's will comes from heaven, then does God live in that world in the sky?" "I think so too." Meg looked at Irina with admiration. She was indeed his wife. She could even think of the same thing as him. "What's the outside world like?" Irina asked curiously. This was the nature of all intelligent life. It was curiosity and yearning for the unknown. "Perhaps it's an endless void." "Barbara said that the world outside the moon is a vast sea of stars," Meg said. "What's the ring you gave, and just now?" "I got it from that woman. It can hide Anne's aura and prevent those things from finding her," Meg explained. "That woman is pretty good to you?" Irina looked up at him with a smile. "She's just an emotionless robot. I'll give her the 3-headed snake and promise to give her all the weird underground creatures in the future in exchange for this ring," Meg said calmly. "Is that so?" Irina declined to comment as her slender hands once again wrapped around his neck. "Again? Scared?" The next morning, Meg woke up full of energy. However, When he put on his slippers and went out, he clearly felt that his footsteps were a little weak. Looks like even a god has to restrain himself a little. Meg sighed in his heart, ignoring the advertisement of the blue pill that appeared in his mind. Today was the official day of the wine tasting conference. As one of the favorites to win, Meg had to be there. Half of the 1-month deadline had already passed, and the Saipan Tavern was still a small, unknown tavern. It was still a far cry from its reputation in Rodu. The wine tasting conference was a shortcut. Judging from Eiffel's lousy winemaking skills, the gold medal of the wine tasting conference was indeed a golden signboard. Irina didn't have anything to do today, so the family went out together after breakfast and prepared to hail a carriage to the wine tasting conference. Mr. Hades, your family is also going to attend the wine tasting conference, right? Eiffel and Mara also happened to come out of the tavern and greeted Meg's family with a smile when they saw them. Yes. Meg nodded. Then I'll see you there later, Eiffel said with a smile as he brought Mara onto the small carriage. Meg glanced at Irina. Seeing that she was at ease, he relaxed a little. He walked to the street corner and hailed a carriage, heading straight for the wine tasting conference. The previous wine tasting conferences were organized by the Rodu Wine Association. The venue was in a manor in the south of Rodu, and it was provided by a noble. The carriage stopped outside the manor. Meg's family alighted and saw that the road outside the manor was almost filled with carriages. There are so many carriages. Amy stood on her tiptoes and looked at the endless line of carriages. Yes. Looks like the influence of this wine tasting conference is indeed quite big. Meg nodded with a smile. This was a good thing. Meg showed the invitation card that Eiffel gave him to the ticketing staff at the entrance and successfully entered the manor. This was said to be the manor of a baron, and it occupied a very large area. Apart from the tavern owners who had applied to attend the wine tasting conference, there were also many wine lovers with some status who could enter the venue. Just as Meg was about to find someone to ask where the venue was, Eiffel and Mara walked over. Mr. Hades, we are here. Eiffel came up with Mara with a smile. What a coincidence. We just arrived too, Eiffel said with a smile. Yes. Meg nodded reservedly. His wife was still present, so he had to show a sense of distance. Irina only looked at Eiffel with a smile on her face. She didn't say anything, but her aura was a level higher than Eiffel's. Sister Eiffel, you are so beautiful today. Amy looked at Eiffel, who was wearing a long red dress, and said with sparkling eyes. Eiffel immediately smiled like a flower. She reached out to Amy and said with a smile, Little Amy is so good. Sister will take you to eat good food. Okay. Amy's eyes lit up when she heard that there was good food, and she quickly grabbed Eiffel's hand. The venue is in the cathedral up ahead. It should be starting soon. I will take you there, Eiffel said to Meg. Okay, thank you. Meg nodded. Irina reached out her left hand and took the initiative to hold Meg's arm. Eiffel's gaze focused slightly, and she revealed a polite and awkward smile. She held Amy's hand and walked forward. Meg was a little surprised to see Irina holding his hand. This little action of declaring sovereignty was quite cute. Irina's lips curled up slightly. Little guy, do you think you are worthy of seducing my man in front of me? Surrounded by beauties, Meg became the most beautiful person in the cathedral when he stepped into it. Walking in front of him was Eiffel, who was wearing a long red dress and a small vest. Amy, who was holding her hand, was obedient and cute. Irina, who was holding his arm, was as beautiful as a fairy. She had an elegant temperament, and who was walking beside her, was sweet and youthful. Everyone's eyes instantly fell on Meg. Is this Baron Baraka? Probably only the Baron has such a temperament. The Baron is so lucky. I'm jealous. Everyone's eyes were filled with envy, jealousy, and jealousy. Meg quite liked this kind of gaze. It was so real and not pretentious at all. Then he sat down in the audience according to his seat. Everyone was slightly taken aback. Only then did they notice that Meg was sitting in the Saipan Tavern. So they are in the same industry. Everyone was enlightened, and they were even more jealous. I just want to know how I can't compare to him. Chapter 2081. Isn't that Efi, the owner of the Titan Tavern? The Titan wine was also a renowned wine back in the day. It's a pity that. Yeah, I used to go there often, but it's a pity that it's been lost forever. All that's left is her name. I see her every year, but the Titan wine she brews can't compare to her father's. However, her courage and perseverance are still very commendable. Some people recognized Efi and whispered among themselves with a hint of pity in their voices. For some of the older wine lovers and tavern owners, the Titan Tavern had left a deep impression on them. 30 years ago, the Titan wine won the gold medal at the first wine tasting conference, and it was a legendary wine back then. Back then, the Titan Tavern was one of the most renowned taverns in Rodu. Unfortunately, the legendary brewer died in a robbery 15 years ago and only left behind a daughter who wasn't even 15 years old. The Titan wine had been lost ever since. Even though the Titan Tavern reopened 5 years later, the Titan wine that Efi reintroduced was completely incomparable to the real Titan wine, and it was a huge disappointment to many wine lovers. Of course, there were also some regular customers who would visit the Titan Tavern from time to time as they took care of the daughter of an old friend. Efi greeted a few regular customers before taking a seat with a smile on her face. Meg took a glance at Efi and was able to better understand her difficulties. Making a living was only one part of it. Bearing the expectations of the outside world and the glory of her father was the true source of her pressure. But what kind of tavern is the Saipan Tavern? I don't think I've heard of it before. Yeah, it sounds like a newly opened tavern. Otherwise, I would definitely know about it. That's because you don't know much about them. They're a new rising star in our Rodu, and not many people know about them yet. However, I've heard that their wine is quite good, and even Duke Abraham often visits them. There's such a thing? I've only heard about it. He must have brought wine with him. We'll know when the wine is served. Everyone's conversation turned to Meg, who was sitting beside Efi, and they began to pay more attention to him. The large church that could hold thousands of people was quickly filled to the brim, and there were even many people standing in the back row. Baron Kurt has arrived. Someone yelled. Everyone stood up. A white-haired but hale and hearty old man walked in from the door. Behind him were several other old men of similar age. The one in the middle is Baron Kurt. He's the vice president of the Wine Association and one of the founders of the Wine Tasting Conference. The one with the beard next to him is Fergus, the president of the Wine Association. He's a fair and professional elder. Eiffel introduced the elders to Meg. The Wine Association was a relatively independent organization, and these elders with their own statuses ensured that the wine tasting conference was relatively fair and just. As the venue provider, Kurt represented the wine conference and gave a short speech to this year's wine conference. Let's cut to the chase. I know you don't want to hear me ramble on. I just want to know if any new wines have appeared in Rodu during the past year. Kurt smiled and said, "That's right, I also want to know." Then, let's officially start tasting the wine. I can't wait any longer. Everyone below the stage smiled knowingly. This Baron was indeed an interesting person. At the very front of the church was a platform that was more than a meter tall. 5 tables were arranged in a row, and the 5 judges were seated. Each of them had a large glass filled with warm water in their hands. The wine tasting conference, as the name implied, was to taste the wines and rate them. Then, the winner would be decided based on the scores. As for the grading criteria, each judge would use a 10-point system based on the subjective feelings of the 5 wine masters. It didn't sound strict enough, but as long as the 5 wine masters were professional and fair, this was actually a relatively fair and effective method. There were more than 300 taverns participating in this year's wine tasting conference. Because of the large number of taverns, they were divided into groups of 5 by drawing lots. In order to reduce other factors affecting the winemaker's judgment of the wines, each group of wines wasn't introduced before they were brought to the stage. They were only revealed after the grading. A staff member came out with a wine bottle and 5 small empty wine glasses. He opened the bottle on the spot, then poured the wine into the glasses in front of everyone and brought them to the 5 judges. The faint aroma of the wine wafted through the air. Meg closed his eyes and sniffed. It was a typical sweet fruit wine. The aroma was passable, and there was nothing special about it. It was only slightly better than the home-brewed wines of ordinary families. The judges lifted their glasses and sniffed. Some shook their heads, some nodded, but their expressions were calm. Then, they each took a small sip and put down the wine cup in their hands. The taste of this wine is passable. It's a bit sweet, but there's still room for improvement. Kurt gave a brief review, then picked up the scoreboard in front of him. Kurt gave a score of 6, Fergus gave a score of 7, and the other 3 judges also gave scores between 5 and 7. First group, first bottle, Kalu's wine from Kalu's Tavern. Score: 31. The host quickly introduced. 50 points, a barely passable score. Meg nodded slightly. He had some recognition of the judges' professionalism. Not far away, a fatty looked quite happy. Although it was only an ordinary score, it was a few points higher than last year's. Moreover, it was the first wine on stage this year, so it would definitely be remembered by more people. The other 4 bottles of wine in the first group all scored between 30 and 40 points. Each time, a judge would give a brief review, which could also be considered as a suggestion. The judges tasted the wine in small sips. After tasting it, they would rinse their mouths with warm water and occasionally eat some pastries to fill their stomachs. Although there was a lot of wine, their speed was not slow. "Father, when will it be our turn to drink? And when can we eat?" Amy looked at Meg and asked softly. This kind of occasion was really too boring for the little guy. He could not help but swallow his saliva a few times while looking at the pastries on stage. F looked at Amy and said with a smile, "Why don't Xiao Ai and Xiao go play outside for a while? Mara is outside. Let her take you to eat something delicious." Okay. Amy's eyes lit up, and she immediately nodded her little head. Meg turned to look at Irina. "Let's go." Irina nodded. His mind could completely cover the manor, so there would be no accidents if he let the 2 children go out for a party, and held Amy's little hand and quietly slipped out of the church. Fergus put down his glass and commented with a smile, "This is Kalu's Tavern's explosive wine. The taste is still as explosive as its name, and it brings a pleasant surprise as soon as it enters the mouth. It leaves a deep impression. Moreover, the taste of this year's wine has improved a little. It becomes smoother after entering the throat. It's quite a pleasant surprise." Kurt also nodded with a smile. "Yes, it's a wine that people can't pretend not to know. Compared to previous years, it has indeed improved a lot." The judges showed their scores one after another. Group 32, third bottle, explosive wine from Kalu's Tavern. Score: 48. The highest score so far. The host's voice could not help but raise a few octaves. Chapter 2082. 48 points. That's close to full marks. So strong. Is Reese Tavern's explosive wine going to win the gold medal this year? There was an uproar below the stage. In the previous 30 groups, there weren't many wines that could reach 40 points, and those that could reach 45 points were even rarer. The explosive wine was only 2 points away from full marks. Based on past experiences, it had a very high chance of winning the gold medal. Reese Tavern was very famous in Rodu. It was one of the top high-end taverns in Rodu. Although it hadn't won the gold medal, many of its wines had won the silver medal in the wine tasting conference. The explosive wine was Reese Tavern's signature wine. Using the explosive wine to compete in this wine tasting conference again and getting the recognition of all the judges showed the ambition of Reese Tavern's owner. Everyone's gaze subconsciously turned to the middle-aged man sitting in the front row. He was wearing a luxurious golden robe, and his hair was neat and shiny. "Congratulations, Mr. Boris. Looks like there's hope for the gold medal this year." The people beside him had already started to congratulate him. The middle-aged man, who looked quite respectable, smiled and cupped his hands. He didn't appear to be too excited. The taste of the wine can only be considered above average. Looks like this wine has something special about its taste. Meg thought in his heart. 48 points was indeed a high score. At least from the previous scores, these 4 judges were professional and strict. The owner of Reese Tavern is very impressive. He has many taverns under his name, and each tavern has many main wines. It's said that he has recruited many impressive winemakers and has been working hard to develop better wines, Eiffel introduced as she looked at that man with admiration. Meg nodded and also took a few more glances at Boris. People who dared to invest time and money in innovation were all worthy of respect. It was because of their existence that an industry could continue to develop. And a tavern having more good wines to choose from was also a very strong core competitiveness. This might be the reason why Reese Tavern was still one of the top taverns in Rodu, even though it didn't have any gold medal wines. After the explosive wine received a high score, a few other wines received a high score of 45 points. Most of them were wines that had won the gold medal, but according to the rules of the wine tasting conference, if the gold medal wines of the past didn't have obvious improvements and optimizations, an additional 3 points would be deducted. This law is very intelligent. Meg couldn't help but praise after hearing F's explanation. This was a rule that could constantly encourage outstanding winemakers to improve and innovate. It was also a rule that gave more opportunities to young winemakers. The Wine Association is an organization led by wine lovers. In essence, it's a consumer association, F said with a smile. Won't they get drunk? Irina, who had been silent all this while, asked the judges on the stage. It was already the 45th group. Although the wine tasting was done in small cups and sips, with more than 200 different types of wine mixed together, even if one only took a small sip of each wine, it was still not something an ordinary person could withstand. The judge's alcohol tolerance is quite good. Under normal circumstances, there shouldn't be a problem. Even if a judge is drunk, there are still a few reserve judges who can go on stage to ensure that the wine tasting conference can continue normally. AI Faye explained with a smile. His alcohol tolerance is indeed astonishing. Meg nodded. His alcohol tolerance was not bad, but he wasn't confident that he could remain sober after drinking more than 200 types of wine. However, after drinking more than 200 types of wine in a row and having to give comments, the 5 judges were more or less mentally exhausted. They didn't seem to be as active as they were at the beginning. Next is Group 50, the host announced. Soon, a staff member brought up a slender black wine bottle. It's the Titan wine. F's body unconsciously straightened. Her gaze was fixed on the bottle of wine held by the staff member. Meg's face also showed some interest. With the quality of the Titan wine and 30 years of cellar fermentation, it was naturally easy for it to beat the so-called explosive wine. The audience below the stage was also a little tired. The few wines that they were looking forward to before the wine tasting conference were already out. The suspense had already disappeared. This year's wine tasting conference's gold medal was most likely going to be taken away by the explosive wine. The staff member showed the crowd that the seal on the wine bottle was still intact. Then, in front of everyone, he pulled out the wine cork and poured it into the wine cups one by one. The rich aroma of the wine instantly wafted through the air. That was the elegant combination of the aroma of grapes and the aroma of aged wood. It made the originally dull venue come alive instantly. This wine aroma. Baron Kurt stood up immediately. He looked at the wine cup that the staff member brought over with disbelief. The golden wine swayed slightly in the crystal cup. It was as dazzling as a gemstone. Isn't this the Titan wine? It's brewed by Marcus himself. Fergus also stood up with a look of disbelief. Kurt and Fergus's performance and words caused quite a commotion. The Titan wine was the gold medal wine of the first wine tasting conference more than 30 years ago. It was created by the brewer Marcus. With its unique aroma and incredible strength, it left a legendary figure in Rodu's wine world. However, after Marcus died in a robbery 15 years ago, the authentic Titan wine stopped being produced. Although the Titan Tavern was still open for business, the Titan wine brewed by his daughter, F, was far from the authentic Titan wine. It gradually became a third-rate tavern. All these years, the Titan Tavern had participated in the wine tasting conference almost every day. However, they never scored more than 30 minutes. They didn't even reach the passing mark. They didn't expect that the Titan wine that the Titan Tavern brought out today would be able to outshine the previous wines, just by its aroma alone. It also made the judges and the customers unable to remain calm. As expected of the first gold medal wine, I'm already a little tipsy just by smelling the aroma. It's not just the first gold medal wine. The Titan wine won the gold medal 3 times in 10 years back then. It's the real legend that kept improving. The Titan wine back then was the best wine in Rodu. I can't forget that taste even after more than 10 years. I didn't expect to be able to smell its aroma here today.
Yeah.
It's a pity that a genius brewer like Marcus died so young. F's eyes glistened with tears as she listened to everyone's words. It turned out that even after so many years, there were still people who remember her father and the original taste of the Titan wine. Cups of wine were delivered to the 5 judges one after another. They all had complicated expressions. Kurt and Fergus were the organizers of the wine tasting conference back then. They were the ones who participated in awarding the first gold medal to Marcus. They also witnessed Marcus' research and improvement of the Titan wine, which led to the legend of 3 gold medals in 10 years. They didn't expect that 15 years later, a Titan wine brewed by Marcus would be brought to them again. Miss Effie, I respect and love Master Marcus very much. He is a genius winemaker and, more importantly, a persistent and firm winemaker. Even after 15 years, the legend of him and the Titan wine is still engraved in our hearts. Kurt stood and looked at F, who was sitting below the stage, with a complicated expression. Thank you very much for letting us feel his unparalleled charm again. However, according to the rules of the wine tasting conference, exclusive treasured wines can't be used in the competition. This means that customers won't be able to purchase them in your tavern. Chapter 2083. Regretful. That was the label that many people had for Master Marcus. He had left too suddenly and in too much of a hurry. He didn't even have time to choose a suitable candidate to pass down the brewing techniques of Titan wine. As a result, this fine wine that could have been passed down for thousands of years became a regret in everyone's hearts. Back then, the rare bulk Titan wine in Rodu had been sold at sky-high prices, but it was still very difficult to get a hold of it. Smelling the aroma of authentic Titan wine here today indeed made many old drinkers sigh and reminisce. However, just as Kurt had said, this bottle of wine that Effie had brought out was most likely a single bottle of wine that she had left behind. It was against the rules to use such wine in the wine tasting competition. This was because the purpose of the wine tasting competition was to evaluate and filter the various types of fine wine that could be purchased in Rodu. The most important prerequisite was that there was sufficient quantity and that it could be purchased. Everyone looked at Effie, who had stood up, with some looking at her with pity, while others looked at her with mockery. Even the owner of the Reese Tavern, who had received a high score earlier, couldn't help but turn to look at Effie. Thank you, Master Kurt, for your affirmation of my father, and thank everyone for still remembering my father. Effie first bowed slightly to Kurt to express her gratitude, then stood up straight and said in a loud voice, "This is not a single bottle of wine. It is a wine cellar that my father had sealed away 30 years ago. The cellar can only be opened after 30 years. I opened the cellar a few days ago, and this is the first bottle of Titan wine to be filled. Next, the Titan Tavern will re-release the Titan wine brewed by my father. The daily supply should be around 50 bottles." The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted into an uproar. A Titan wine that has been in the cellar for 30 years can be supplied 50 bottles a day. Master Marcus actually hid so much good wine back then. Looks like the Titan Tavern is going to be a good place to visit in the future. Although Master Marcus has left, his legend is going to start all over again. The drinkers present were all very excited, especially those who couldn't forget about the Titan wine. They had already started to make plans to gather at the Titan Tavern the next day. The tavern owners all had different expressions. If what Effie said was true, then the Titan wine would be a strong competitor for the gold medal. Many people's gazes wandered between Boris and Eiffel. In the past, Marcus had also suppressed Boris Tavern to win the gold medal twice and was hailed as Boris's lifelong rival. He didn't expect that after so many years, Marcus' daughter would attack again with Titan wine, and her opponent would still be Boris's explosive wine. Boris's expression didn't change. He nodded slightly at AI Faye and then turned around. Marcus actually left behind so much hidden wine? Kurt was also surprised, but he quickly nodded and said, if that's the case, this bottle of wine can participate in this year's wine tasting conference.
Thank you.
AI Faye nodded and sat back down, waiting for the judges to give their scores. The host said in a loud voice, okay, everyone, please keep quiet. Next, the judges will start tasting the wine. Let us look forward to the evaluation of this bottle of Titan wine that has been in the cellar for 30 years. The audience quickly quieted down. Everyone looked expectantly at the judges on the stage. Kurt picked up the wine cup and brought it close to his nose. He gently fanned the cup with his hand and took a deep breath of the wine fragrance. The rich and mellow fragrance was intoxicating. The fragrance of the grapes fermented in the oak barrel produced a special fragrance. It was so unique and so elegant that it made the previous wine pale in comparison. He took a sip and the wine slowly slid into his mouth. The taste was cold and dry. The wine's taste was soft, and the wine's fragrance lingered in his mouth. It was rich and charming, elegant and mellow. He seemed to be looking at an elegant goddess, a goddess that made people adore, yet didn't dare to approach. After a long time, Kurt opened his eyes and looked at the wine cup in his hand with admiration, saying, 30 years in the cellar has made the wine's fragrance and taste even more wonderful. It's like it's been sublimated. Whether it's the taste or the taste, it's even more enchanting than the Titan wine of the past. The 30 years in the cellar was probably the last time Kurt made improvements to the Titan wine, making it one step further. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to see this change with his own eyes. Fergus had just put down his wine cup and said with a rueful expression, I thought the Titan wine of the past was already at its peak. Only today did I know that it was only a half-finished product. The cellar allowed the fragrance of the oak barrel to perfectly blend with the wine's fragrance, giving the Titan wine a brand new flavor. This is the most unique and delicious wine I've ever tasted. This is Marcus' work from 30 years ago. At that time, we were also stunned by his Titan wine, and then 30 years later, we were stunned by him again. This is indeed an amazing wine. It's even better than the Titan wine of the past. Time became Marcus' best assistant, helping him finish the rest of the work and creating this true Titan wine. Another judge also exclaimed in admiration. The 5 judges all gave extremely high evaluations. There was silence below the stage. Everyone was waiting for the judges to give the Titan wine a high score. Ev also clenched his fists and nervously waited for the results to come out. Kurt picked up the number plate in front of him and said loudly, I give 10 points. Unfortunately, I can only give 10 points. I also give 10 points. The Titan wine and Marcus are worth it. Fergus picked up the number plate. The other 3 judges also picked up the number plate and gave a perfect score of 10 points. 50 points. It seems that the wine tasting conference hasn't had a perfect score for 3 years, right? After 16 years, the Titan wine is going to win the gold medal for the 4th time. The scene suddenly burst into an uproar. A perfect score of 50 points was tantamount to announcing that the Titan wine had won the gold medal again. And the Titan wine had already won this honor 3 times. Ev finally couldn't hold back her tears. She bit her lips and tried hard to control her expression. Congratulations. I believe that your father will feel gratified when he hears this news. Meg looked at her and said softly, thank you, Mr. Hades. Ev wiped her tears and quickly stabilized her emotions. Then, she smiled and responded to the congratulations of the people around her. The Titan wine returned with a perfect score of 50 points, just like Marcus' legendary life. After the scene quieted down a little, Kurt looked at Ev and said, "Miss Ev, I wonder if I have the honor of buying this bottle of Titan wine? I believe that this is a very memorable bottle of wine. It is also a bottle of wine that is worth carefully tasting. When my father was alive, he often said that you were an elder that he admired and respected. Please allow me to give this bottle of wine to you," Ev said with a smile. "Then I won't be polite. I will often come to the Titan Tavern in the future." Kurt got up and took away the wine and cork from the staff's tray. After closing the cork, he put it next to his hand. "You are really quick. How about we have dinner together tonight?" Fergus looked at the wine on the table and said with a smile,
Sure.
"I have a few bottles of good wine that I can take out to drink, but this bottle is not one of them." Kurt nodded with a smile. Chapter 2084. The Titan wine brought by AI Faye pushed the wine tasting conference to its climax. A bottle of wine brewed 30 years ago had crossed the river of time and once again shone brightly at the wine tasting conference. A perfect score meant that there was no suspense about the gold medal wine of the wine tasting conference. No one thought that there would be a wine that could be compared to the Titan wine in the remaining 10 groups of wine. That was what the 5 judges thought as well. But AI Faye didn't think so. She knew how unique Moutai was and how talented Meg was as a winemaker. She even thought that if there were 2 wines with perfect scores at the wine tasting conference, who would be the only gold medal? Such a situation had never happened in the 30 years of the wine tasting conference. Group after group of wines were sent to the stage. Perhaps it was because the Titan wine was too amazing that the judges were still in a daze, or perhaps it was because the quality of the following wines was too worrying, but none of the 4 groups of wines lasted more than 30 minutes. Kurt yawned and rubbed his eyes. He turned his head and whispered to Fergus, "I feel like I'm not in the right state. This group is finished. Let Gerald take my place." "That's good. You drank a lot today." Fergus nodded. Group 55, begin the wine tasting. The host's voice was a bit hoarse. Meg yawned. He was also a bit sleepy. He turned his head, and his eyes fell on the round wine bottle in the hands of the staff. His eyes lit up, and he was suddenly energized. He had waited all morning for his Moutai to come on stage. He didn't think that his luck would be so bad, and he would be ranked at the bottom. "It's here." AI Faye was also suddenly energized. Her expression became nervous again. Although she knew that Moutai was a good wine that was hard to find, she still hoped that it could get a good ranking at the wine tasting conference. The staff carried a round wine bottle to the stage. Everyone just glanced at it and lost interest. Most of the strong taverns had been evaluated. The explosion wine was the strongest, but it still couldn't beat the Titan wine. The staff studied it for a while and removed the red cloth wrapped around the bottle cap. Then he pulled the cork out. Pop, a rich wine aroma quickly gushed out and quickly spread in all directions. This wine aroma. The people sitting near the high platform smelled the fragrance first and raised their heads in surprise. The eyes of the judges, who were tired and a little drunk, lit up one after another. They looked at the round wine bottle in the staff's hand in astonishment. The rich wine aroma was even more impactful than the Titan wine from before. If the aroma of the Titan wine was that of an elegant lady, then this aroma was more like an irresistible hurricane. Compared to the fragrance of grapes, her fragrance was even more mellow and deep. When he savored it carefully, he was actually unable to distinguish exactly how many fragrances she had, and he only became more and more immersed in it. What wine is this? How can the wine be so fragrant? Kurt, who was about to step down, suddenly raised his head and looked at the staff member, who was pouring wine with a surprised expression. "Just by smelling the aroma, I can tell it's good wine. It seems like this year's wine tasting conference will have a new wine." Fergus' eyes also lit up as he spoke to Kurt with a smile. This was definitely the first time this wine had appeared at the wine tasting conference. Otherwise, with their experience, it was impossible for them not to recognize it. They were just curious about which tavern this wine came from and which master's new work was it. As the aroma of the wine spread out, there was also some commotion below the stage. Even the audience sitting in the last row of the church couldn't help but stretch their necks to look. This was the first time they had smelled the aroma of wine today. Those present were either tavern owners or wine lovers for many years. They were all experts. Once the aroma of the wine was released, they could naturally distinguish between good and bad. There were even people who had already begun to inquire about whose wine this was, guessing whether it could rival the Titan wine. Meg sat quietly and didn't say a word. An indifferent smile hung at the corner of his mouth, and he was already prepared to show off. The staff member began to pour the wine. The pure and transparent wine was poured into the crystal cups, which were as translucent as pearls. Cup after cup of wine was placed in front of the judges. The 5 judges all looked at the wine in front of them as if they had received a treasure. Fruit wine and grain wine were usually dark in color, which was very difficult to avoid during the brewing process. Such a pure and transparent wine was extremely rare. In contrast to the clear color of the wine, there was a rich aroma. It was hard to imagine that this liquid, which was as clear and transparent as a mountain spring, could emit such an alluring aroma. In terms of aroma alone, none of the more than 200 wines tasted today could be compared to this. This should be grain wine. It was brewed using the same method as the Titan wine. The aroma of the wine is rich, the aroma of the sauce, the aroma of the cellar, and a faint mellow sweetness are mixed together. The aroma is extremely unique. Kurt commented while fanning the aroma of the wine with his hand, then took a sip of the wine. Kurt closed his eyes. His brows furrowed at first, then slowly relaxed. The corner of his mouth rose slightly, revealing a satisfied smile. His slightly open mouth showed his relaxed state. After a long time, Kurt opened his eyes and couldn't help but exclaim, "This wine is soft, refreshing, and rich." After drinking it, the aftertaste lingers. It's truly a rare wine that's hard to come by in 100 years. As a true wine lover, whether it was the establishment of the Wine Association or the Wine Tasting Conference, he wanted to discover more fine wines and better winemakers. However, in the past few decades, there weren't many wines that could amaze him. Marcus' Titan wine was one, and the wine he tasted today was the second. However, the Titan wine that Marcus brought to the scene 30 years ago couldn't be compared to this wine. The 30 years of cellar storage gave it a unique soul, giving it the qualifications to compete with this wine. This was a very perfect wine, or rather, it was a wine that exceeded the upper limit of what he could give advice on. Other than praising the wine and being curious as to who had secretly brewed such a fine wine, he had nothing else to say. Fergus raised his head and drank all the wine in his cup. He smacked his lips and put down the cup, still somewhat unsatisfied. He nodded and said to Kurt, "Everyone has smelled the aroma of the wine." Kurt has also mentioned the aroma of the wine. "I can only say that this is one of the best wines I have ever tasted in my life, and it can even be ranked in the top 3. Now I'm very curious as to who could brew such a fine wine and keep it so mysterious." Kurt and Fergus gave an extremely high evaluation and even promoted this wine to a historical status. Everyone was curiously guessing which tavern had presented this wine.
Perhaps it could really compete with the Titan wine.
"Congratulations, Mr. Hades' Moutai is indeed extraordinary." Eiffel turned to look at Meg and said with a sincere smile, "What I am more curious about now is, can there be 2 gold medals at the wine tasting conference?" Meg frowned slightly. Chapter 2085. Meg wasn't worried at all about the Moutai getting good reviews. But according to the rules of the wine tasting conference, there was only 1 gold medal wine. The Titan wine had already gotten 50 points. No matter how strong the Moutai was, there was still a limit. If that was the case, the situation became a little awkward. "This AI," Faye muttered. There hadn't been a double gold medal situation in the history of the wine tasting conference. "Judges, you have all given very high reviews for this wine. Now let's ask the judges to grade this wine. Then we can reveal the wine that brought everyone a surprise," which tavern it came from, and which winemaker was made by. The host regained control of the chaotic scene. Follow my heart's choice. Kurt picked up the scorecard in front of him and gave 10 points. Fergus picked up the 10-point card and raised his glass at the same time. He smiled and said, I rarely use the word perfect to evaluate a wine, but this is indeed an impeccable wine. Smell this glass, it's still fragrant. It's really amazing. The other 3 judges also gave the highest score of 10 points. The scene instantly boiled over. Today, the second 50 points had appeared. In a wine tasting conference, there were actually 2 full 50 points wines. This had never happened in the history of the wine tasting conference. The Titan wine was quite famous, and it had once created the miracle of 3 gold medals. But where did this mysterious wine come from? It was as if it had suddenly appeared and then created a miracle in the wine tasting conference. Which tavern developed this in secret? Boris is so calm. Could it be that Boris Tavern secretly developed it? I don't think so. This isn't a wine that an opportunistic businessman like Boris can come up with. 250 points. How will this year's gold medal be distributed? Everyone was discussing enthusiastically. At the same time, they were all curiously guessing the origin of this wine. I'm so bored. I'm going to find the children first, Irina said to Meg, and got up to leave the noisy church. Madam doesn't seem to be very happy. AI Faye looked at Irina's back and said doubtfully. Perhaps she didn't know what the honor of winning a gold medal meant to a tavern. It was something worth celebrating. And for a winemaker, this honor was a great recognition. But Irina didn't give her husband any encouragement or congratulations. It's just a small scene. She usually doesn't care, Meg said with a smile. Actually, he wasn't very excited either. If he couldn't conquer the drunkards in the alternate world with the wine master's trump card, then it would be too embarrassing. The host's Moutai wine? Saipan Tavern? The scene fell silent. Everyone was puzzled. The name of this tavern sounded very unfamiliar. It wasn't one of the famous taverns in Rodu. A boss at the side looked around, and his gaze landed on Mag. When he saw the name of the tavern pasted on the back of his chair, his eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "It's him." They recalled that this man had almost been mistaken for a baron, due to the fact that he was surrounded by so many beauties. No one would have thought that this young and promising man with so many beauties in his arms was the owner of the wine that had received a perfect score of 50 points. Furthermore, the owners of the 2 wines that had received perfect scores of 50 points were sitting together. Meg stood up with a smile and nodded as he sensed everyone's gaze on him. That's right, it was the aura of a leader. Young man, did you brew this wine? Kurt was a little surprised to see how young Meg was. That's right. Meg nodded. Good. You're young and promising. Kurt nodded as he looked at Meg with approval in his eyes. He then looked at AI Faye, who was sitting beside him, and sighed with emotion. Marcus was around your age when he came here with the Titan wine, and he also made a name for himself. AI Faye looked up at Mag, and it was as if light had shone down on him. She could see some of her father's silver on him, and tears began to well up in her eyes again. Thank you. Meg nodded before sitting down again. The Moutai wine score of 50 points was even more shocking to everyone than the Symbian wine. At the same time, it also piqued everyone's curiosity. How were the organizers going to decide who would win the gold medal? Nice to meet you. I am the owner of the Kesha Tavern, my Deshuan, the portly owner next door said to Meg with a smile. Nice to meet you. Meg nodded in a reserved manner. Congratulations on the success of your Moutai wine, boss. However, forgive me for my ignorance, but I still don't know where the Symbian Tavern is located. I'd like to try it myself in a few days. My Deshuan wasn't discouraged. All of the surrounding tavern owners also perked up their ears. From today onward, the Symbian Tavern was destined to become one of the most popular taverns in Rodu. Everyone was curious about this unknown tavern. Where exactly was it opened? Why did it have such good wine? And why was it unknown before? You're too kind, Boss my Deshuan. Our tavern has only just opened, so it's normal that you don't know about it. The tavern is located on Romo Street, and it's open at night. If you have time, you can come and have a seat. Meg quickly switched to professional mode for interested customers. Romo Street. My Dishuan thought for a moment before his eyes suddenly widened. He glanced at AI Faye with a hint of surprise, then turned to Meg and said, "Then isn't it on the same street as the Titan Tavern?" "That's right. Boss Hades' tavern is right across from ours," AI Faye replied with a smile. AI Faye's words shocked everyone. Two taverns on the same street had both received 50 points in the wine tasting conference. The Titan Tavern was destined to return to the top with the return of the Titan Tavern. Meanwhile, the Moutai wine was already able to compete with the Titan Tavern after receiving such praise and a perfect score. It was destined to become one of the most popular taverns in Rodu. Everyone could already imagine how popular this street was going to be in the future. If I remember correctly, Romo Street is really lonely now. Most of the shops on both sides of the street have closed down, and the rest are barely hanging on. Back in the day, the Titan Tavern was able to bring Romo Street to prominence. Now, with the addition of the Symbian Tavern, it's only a matter of time before Romo Street returns to its former glory. Why don't we set up a shop on Romo Street and open a tavern as well? Big Brother is eating the meat, so maybe we can get some soup. After all, high-end wines are all limited in quantity. That's a good idea. Let's go check it out later. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.